So I'd like to call the September 10th meeting of the Town of Concord Planning Board to order. This meeting is being videotaped. You are also welcome to audio or videotape this meeting yourself as well, but please let us know if you are so your arrangements don't disrupt the meeting. So I think we will go ahead and start with our 7 o'clock item, which is our recommendation to the ZBA for the application of Culinary Homes LLC for a special permit for their 4-unit planned residential development at 430 Old Bedford Road. So who is speaking for the applicant tonight? Paul?
Well, I'll start.
Sure.
Thank you. Paul Mahoney from Mahoney Architects in Concord. So we have our whole team here, and they will speak individually to items that pertain to their expertise. Zur is here, he's the developer applicant. So we've been before you many times before, so we thought we would try to be a little bit briefer this evening and highlight some of the things that are different.
Yeah.
That have changed. So if you agree with that, that's the way we'll proceed. And then anything you want to go into detail on, just let us know and we can go back to anything like that.
Okay.
So you recall the history of this project. We've been working on it for a couple of years. We originally started with 8 units, reduced it to 7, and went pretty far along in that review. Got a lot of feedback from various staff, and we just kept running up against a lot of hurdles. And so you may recall we came to you informally, I think it was in late May or early June, with a concept for a 4-unit plan that seemed to address a lot of these issues, and we received what we perceived as a positive response from you at that time. So we developed it into a formal application, which is what you've reviewed and you have the planner's report on. So to highlight some of the things that have changed from the 7-unit to the 4-unit plan, basically, we previously had 2 units up in this corner where the paddock was. Those are no longer there. And we had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there was a sort of a duplex back here, 2 units back here. So we took out the back unit and the 2 front units. And what that did is it created a lot of advantages over the previous applications. And just to summarize those, we have less density, obviously, fewer units on site. What we think is a huge advantage of this plan is that we've, in our opinion, preserved the Bedford Road viewscape. So we've got the original farmhouse here and the original barn here. And now without the 2 units that used to be here, we've left this big open area where the paddock is. And we've incorporated that into the overall design of the project.
And this isn't the very latest plan, right?
This is the very latest submission. We've brought a sketch that Kim worked on with an abutter over the last couple of days, responding to some comments that came out of our NIC hearing last week. So
Because I thought that there was also this attached unit concept.
The 1 and 2
sorry.
connection.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Okay.
Yes, I'll get to that. So just to continue on these advantages, less square footage overall, obviously, with 4 units, fewer bedrooms and fewer on-site septic, and a smaller on-site septic. We eliminated the second driveway, which used to be here, which had a host of issues with sightlines and things of that nature. And because we have fewer units and more space around and between the units, we have improved the ability for snow storage. So that's a summary of all of these advantages. At the same time, we feel that we've kept a lot of the original advantages that we had even with fewer units. So those include preserving the farmhouse and preserving the barn. We still think we have a diverse setup of unit types, and we're hoping types of families that will live here. So the 2 back units are still what we consider empty nester units. So they have master bedroom suites on the 1st floor and 2-bedroom up on the 2nd floor. But we're envisioning that as something that, you know, a person of middle age might be interested in. And then the front 2 buildings, all of their bedrooms are up on the 2nd floor. So that lends itself more to younger families. And the barn is now designed with 4 bedrooms, and the farmhouse and the 2 empty nester units are designed with 3 bedrooms. So we're hoping for some diversity and just lifestyle in the project. And then, of course, ultimately, this whole project began with this concept of a culinary experience. And we're still keeping all of that. So we've got the gardens still here that go to all the units, and additional garden space here, and all sorts of fruit trees and bushes and meandering pathways that link you through the site. So we think we've still retained a lot of what we tried to start out with within this project. So that's just a quick overview of the sort of grand changes that we made on this. I was going to hand it over to George, and he could speak more specifically to some of the engineering issues, and then Kim could speak to some of the landscape issues. Miles is here. He's been focusing on the invasive areas and how we're dealing with those, and we really covered that with the NRC, so we weren't going to have him present, but if you have any specific questions, he'd be glad to do that. And then just to answer your question about the attached unit. So that was a comment in the planner's report.
Right.
And we are attaching the farmhouse to the barn, and I sent a sketch of that. I don't know if do you have that, Elizabeth? Basically, those two buildings come very close to each other right now. So we just designed a little tiny, almost like a shed-like piece that will connect the two of them. And that will be basically like a shared storage area or dedicated to one, and it'll create a common wall.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Right, it was basically just that, adding that little.
Yep, so previously that was the corner of the barn. And
Doodad.
this is the corner of the farmhouse, so we're just gonna do this little connection here, and that'll become a storage piece. It'll either all be dedicated to this farmhouse building, or we'll split it in some way and share it between the two.
I mean, that's.
What was the intent?
The intent was to create an attached unit.
For our PRD, we have to show a diversity of unit types. And so, either, in terms of the diversity is in either like duplex versus single family, or size of unit or price of unit, right? And so right now, failing this, there would be all single family units.
Right.
And then the price range, I don't think that it's really been discussed in depth, but three of the four units are roughly the same scale, and so there isn't that much diversity technically, I would claim.
Right.
And so from the point of view of the PRD, we need to rule upon that.
Okay.
So
I would just point out, I think there are other values that didn't met in the PRD. Having that connection would complicate things from a homeowner's insurance perspective, in terms of writing the policy. It's just a different kind of policy if you connect the two buildings like that. So there may be countervailing.
I mean, and frankly, it does absolutely nothing.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't count
It
that
doesn't
towards
change
diversity
anything
alone,
in terms of what is
I get the intent though.
yeah. I mean, I think it just reflects the kind of constraints of clearly these structures, because they're existing structures, but then also perhaps of the site and the concept. So I think it's just one of those things we have to take into account. Yeah. I mean, can we have a reaction maybe to this? Because I know you're the architect, so I would say that it's probably not something that I would encourage that they proceed with, regardless of what our criteria are. I mean, I think kind of shown that, okay, you could, by the letter of the law, do something, but.
Do you have a sense of what the elevation looks like there? I mean, what's the roof line?
It'd really be modest. I mean, this is a hip roof over this garage, 1 story. This is a sort of a 1-story shed roof on this side of the barn. So we're kind of connecting 1-story buildings, and this would probably be just a gable roof that would overlay, and then overlay both roofs, basically. So we're trying to actually make it not that visible, but as you say, meet the letter of the law, and the zoning criteria describes it as a shared vertical wall.
Yeah.
Or shared horizontal wall if you're doing like apartments. So
I think we're going to try to tighten that up in the future.
yeah.
But
So we kind of felt like, okay, we've
it's not an outright. It's one of these criteria.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we don't put something in that doesn't serve the homeowners. So.
Right, it's
when
just
we-
one of the PRD criteria, you know, again,
I guess my feeling would be if you feel that it is,
There's some comments that maybe if you stood on the other side.
If you stood over
oh, I'm
there,
sorry,
Thank you.
sorry.
Thank you so much.
so, I mean, another way to kind of address the requirement, and again, you know, I don't know that we've heard much about the pricing, but if there indeed is a real spectrum of pricing, then that would just be very helpful to understand because, I mean, you know, just ranges even.
Right.
Target ranges because,
Sure.
you know, there's certainly a different amount, level of desirability among
Yes.
the
I
units
think
and their
it would be,
locations.
first of all, it's a market rate project, so
Of course.
it's somewhat unpredictable.
Oh,
You don't know
totally.
your costs until you're done, and you don't know what's happening in the world until you go to market.
Yeah.
But given that, I think as you're alluding to, 3 of these units are of similar quality and space around them and privacy, things of that nature, the
Yeah.
empty nester units in the barn. And then certainly the farmhouse has, you know, its own character, but maybe less appealing aspects than the other 2 because of its location and proximity to the road.
Right.
And so you would.
And also its square footage.
Square
Yeah,
footage.
and probably the configuration of spaces in a historic
It's, exactly.
house.
I mean, it's a nice historic home, but it is a home of that age, so it's definitely smaller spaces, and the kitchen just doesn't compare to the others. So things like that, even no matter what goes on with your costs in the market, that one is unlikely to command the value that others might.
Yeah.
So-
And then the other factor is what is diversity in a cohort of 4? When you have, you know, 37 units, diversity is something that you can kind of statistically understand, you know. 4, it's a little harder to.
So I think, from my perspective, you know, if you feel like you have to hold to the letter of your bylaw and say it has to be attached, we would say this would be a way to attach, even though it's
Yeah.
not like a townhouse traditional attachment, but it does attach them and meets the definition of a vertical wall. And on the other hand, if you felt comfortable with the discussion about diversity and pricing that we just had, then, you know, we would be fine not making that connection if you felt it could be satisfied on the.
Yeah, well, I
Diversity
guess the
side.
question I have is does that, I guess, do you have info that would help us with that part of it?
Well, I guess that's a question as to whether in 10.2.3,
Yeah,
there's not an or, it's an and. Meaning
Right.
it's got to be
Shall
number of
consist of the
bedrooms,
following
price of
mix.
rental, and 2 of the 3 styles of units, single family, 2-family, or multi-family.
well, there is a difference in the number of bedrooms here, 3 versus
Right.
4,
So
which is
different-
not a
so
big difference. but-
1,
Yeah,
difference in the prices,
right.
2, and 2 of the 3 styles of units.
Ah,
What it's saying.
See, well, it's funny. I don't read it that way. Such diversity
Yeah,
shall consist of. Oh, it does. Following mix. Yeah,
A following
a
mix,
mix kind of means pick
of
and
those
choose.
3. It's a mix of those 3, and that's how it's been in.
So it doesn't have to be all 3.
If that's the interpretation, I'm happy to go with that.
Well, that's how it has been interpreted for, you know, the last. I don't, you know.
I mean, I
Or-
can't recall one though that we've had that hasn't had all 3, at least to some degree. I mean, again,
With the minimum
this is
number
about
of
the
units,
smallest
yeah.
PRD that I've seen, I think, in my tenure. So it's just, you know, a little bit more difficult to prove. Yeah. Okay, well,
So, do you want to move on from there, or do you have?
I think that,
I had a quick question
Yeah.
about square footage.
Yeah.
You show the new square footage is about 14,000. You said that's
Yep.
less than previously.
Yep.
Do you have the number of square feet for the 7
Previous.
units? Because you did have
I do.
several smaller units.
Yep, so the total difference is the 7-unit plan totaled 22,395 square feet,
So that is appreciably different.
and the 4-unit plan totals 14,709 square feet.
and that's gross floor area.
Yep, that's right.
Not including.
We had previously 11 bedroom septic on site, now we have 6.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're
Okay,
ready
for
for the
me?
next presenter.
Okay,
Yeah.
so George can speak to some of the technical issues.
I
can be very brief as well. George Practice from Stansky and McNary. Even more brief. But to stay on that, the attached unit, it checks two boxes. It checks the zoning box. It also allows us to connect that duplex to the sewer with less difficulty. So attaching those units actually serves two purposes.
Huh.
It's because you're able to utilize the existing sewer connection to the barn?
We can, you can connect one building to the sewer without going to the
I see.
public works.
Huh, okay.
Without jumping through some hoops. And that helps get some sewage off the property. So, as Paul said, some of the main things, we eliminated the units down here, which also eliminated the second driveway. There are some questions about site distance there and concerns from engineering. It simplifies this quite a bit with respect to another intersection, stormwater that was associated with that driveway, that sort of thing. The other driveway has been moved away from the property line, allowing for more landscaping that's going to be planted there. The driveway is a bit narrower than it was before overall. It's 18 feet rather than 20. The fire department was satisfied with that. And we've worked through some other stormwater concerns the engineering had, and they've weighed in, and the board naturally has seen this summary of that, and they were satisfied there. The septic system, much smaller, 6-bedroom, isn't something that would be unlike a single-family house design that we might do in town. And the Board of Health has weighed in on that as well, and feels that that's an approvable plan. So from an engineering perspective, it's all simpler. Like, as Paul said, more snow storage.
Can you
less
point that out,
infrastructure.
since that was a question earlier?
Sure.
Just,
The dark areas here are the areas we've identified as snow storage, and that's not where you plow all the snow, it's where you stockpile the snow if you need to make some space. But we think it's a very conservative plan. We felt that the 7 units had adequate storage, but this is just about half of that in terms of the amount of driveway and double the amount of green space you have to put in some ways between buildings. It was not a real, there's not a lot of engineering loose ends left, but if the board has any questions. It's getting
I mean,
iterations of scrutiny and revision and resubmission, and I think
well, I think that also the revisions of the plan have kind of made your job easier rather than harder.
much easier.
So, it doesn't, I'm sure not for everyone does it 100% resolve all the questions, but certainly helps. Yeah.
If there aren't further questions, Kim can come up and
Yep.
be brief as well.
Be as brief as possible. So Paul discussed some of the things that are new that involve the landscape. I just made a quick list, so I'm gonna just pretty much read this list out in case you'd like to follow along. So as Paul said, we're keeping the paddock. We were really wanting to preserve this view, which we thought was important for the this as you come down the streets here. So we're keeping this open, maintaining the paddock and the fence lines almost exactly where they are now, with some improvements. Can you put on the slide that shows the fences before and after? There they are. So this is the view we're preserving, but we'd like to improve the fences, and this is just a board fence and it's just nailed kind of randomly to these round posts, and it's partly white and then natural wood. And then on the other fences are just post and wire, and they're kind of falling apart. But if we go to the next, we'd just like to propose an improvement. You see this kind of fence in the neighborhood. It's just a little bit more refined. It's a sturdy fence. Then the other fences we'd like to propose are just really the split rail. And around the gardens, it'd also be split rail, but with a wire. It would almost disappear, but it would keep the rabbits out.
I saw some comments about the changing the placement of the fence.
Right, and I'm coming to that in
Okay.
a second. Well, we could switch to that if you'd like.
That's all right.
We'll go back to the plan. So other things that we've, so this is the area that I'm gonna talk about in a minute. That's different than what's shown up here. We've increased the planting along this property line. I had a nice meeting with David, who lives here, and we agreed that we would be increasing the planting, but in doing that, we're going to leave the trees that are there as long as they're not invasive trees, and we're gonna be planting in between. So, so this is a little thicker here. As Paul or George mentioned, this becomes a thicker edge here with trees and shrubs in a stronger way than it was before. We're also replanting this buffer, this evergreen kind of copse here. The arborist that we had on site recommended that these would be dangerous to leave. But we wanted to have that similar view as you come into the property, or looking from outside the property. So we're replanting, but in a more sort of educated way. Those other trees have just been planted one right next to the other, and really didn't give each tree enough room to grow. So we're redoing that copse there. There's one apple tree that's in bad shape right about here, which might be a remnant from a former orchard. So because this is the Culinary homes project, we're putting in quite a few fruit trees, and this would become a small apple orchard. We've got pear trees, peach trees, I think here, pear trees along here, and fruit trees sprinkled throughout the property. Let's see.
With the reduction in the number of units, is there any change in the garden size? I'm just wondering if, are there enough residents to maintain those plots?
I guess we'll see. If somebody buys into that, what we've got now we have 4 units. We've broken this into 4 spots here.
But you've kept the same dimensions of the
Pretty
garden
much,
spaces.
yeah, they're pretty close. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the difference is. but
Gotta
it's
hope you
very
get some
similar.
ambitious
Some real farmers
gardeners,
moving in.
yeah.
Oops,
That's
the idea.
Mhm.
So people would like that.
Yeah, I mean, are there, I guess, because there have been concerns from the public raised about trees, and I think you've talked about some of the considerations, the health of the existing trees, the density of existing plantings, and then, the need to replant around peripheries. Are there trees that are being taken down to form those garden plots, or is those areas that are already clear for the most part?
It's pretty open in the back. There are a lot of walnuts here.
Right.
But there is sort of almost a meadow back here. If you can remember when we walked it, it was.
Yeah, I was just
opening.
just trying to understand that, given the reduction in units, is there a case that can be made for that back garden plot, or or resizing that might save some or more of those walnuts, for example? Just
Right. There's one tree I have to say that I haven't talked to Zora about, but there's one tree here that might fall into that category. But other than that, they were pretty weedy.
Uh-huh.
They're not great specimens, and what we're putting back are a
Gonna
lot
be-
of, that are going to really thrive.
Uh-huh.
And the diversity and the species is gonna really improve.
How many trees are you removing?
Well, please, let's hold comments to the end.
The other thing that I should point out is now that we've changed the layout of the buildings or removed these buildings, we've got a nice wildlife corridor here that we didn't have before, and it's almost half or more of the property, if you include this. So that's quite, I think, a nice plus. So if we can go to that slide that shows the
Scan.
Is it this one?
So Cindy and I, Cindy lives right here, we met yesterday, late yesterday afternoon, the same, where are you? There you are, the same plan that we talked about. I haven't had time to put it onto the major plan yet. But Cindy's concern was that the path went a little too close to her property line. She wanted some buffering here. So we went back to one of the original designs earlier on where we wiggled this path. And that requires the paddock fence to be changed location a little bit. Generally, it's still, the open space. It's going to be meadow grass around it, and then mowed meadow grass for kids to play in here. But we've got a combination of different kinds of evergreen trees and rhododendrons here, and one new oak tree here. And this is more or less her house. It might extend a little bit further out here. We weren't quite sure, but as you can see, the idea is to give her the screening from the public path.
Okay, and then you had mentioned on the western side, I think the earlier presentation was just showing that because the driveway's been moved away from the line, that you've got more vegetation you've put in there.
Right, more opportunity there. And I think that's it.
So about how many non-invasive mature trees do you think you'll need to be removing as part of the project?
So I think we're removing 44.
44, and how many trees as opposed to shrubs and things do you think you're putting in?
126.
Okay.
Not counting.
Right, and that doesn't include all the, it's fine. The
Yeah, so
buffer,
which,
the invasive, the remediation for the invasive removal. So there'll be more than that. That's just on my plan. But after Miles takes out all the invasives, his idea is, what he's going to do is put in massive amounts of shrubs and and other plant material right in here. So all of this will be replanted after the invasives come out.
Okay.
So that's 123 or 126 plus.
And is there a public easement for that trail, or is that any?
It'll
Yeah.
be the open space.
Okay.
Conservation restriction.
And is there any signage or anything planned for that to let people know that that's there?
So
or-
we would have a sign right here that just says nicely, this
Yeah.
is part of, I don't know how we'll word it, but this is private basically.
Uh-huh.
But the public is able to use this loop here.
Any signage at the head so that people will know that that's a public trail?
Well, we
That-
haven't
that
really
would
talked
be-
about it, but
yeah, that would be something that they would work out with the natural resources director as part of the conservation restriction language.
Okay.
anything else?
I would like to hear a little bit about the invasives plan. I'm just curious what is going to be done. I'm just curious how you're going to remediate that, because it is a big problem on the site, and I'm
Yeah, sure.
curious what you're going
So I
to do.
didn't submit anything, but I do.
That's okay.
do have
I think you can
boards,
just
if that's all right, but we could
describe
also
it.
just talk about it. So. currently there are, thank you. Thank you. So I'm Miles Connors with Parter Ecological. We deal with invasive plant management and native restoration. So this is the site. I tried to shade the areas of densest invasive vegetation with the lightest areas of dense vegetation here. This whole back area is a native red maple wetland, right? And along with that comes obviously your mass species of native red maples, as well as things like spicebush, highbush blueberry, winterberry, ostrich fern, and so forth. So our restoration plan is basically taking off of that plant palette, right, and moving it up into these buffer zones, which have been historically mown. Not tightly as a lawn, but I mean certainly mowed more as like an open meadow or field. So these open meadows, according to NRC, they have a 5-foot on center for any of the mitigation requirement for shrubs. And because a lot of this area in through here is pretty densely planted or covered in tree cover already, like you have many oaks and red maples across this area. This is densely forested with red maples, and there's also trees on these sides, so essentially in this area. Majority of this density of replacement we're calling for native shrubs. The methods for removal are essentially there's some mowing, right, in some of the more open areas, but into these areas, like inside this 25-foot no disturb zone, a lot of that is done with handwork. But also the NRC has approved a cut and dab application for invasive shrubs, trees, and vines. So we'll be doing that work in through these locations and then doing the restoration. So according to these, we're basically some quick numbers here. Like as an example, this number A that's off to this side, the total square feet of that area is 2,400 square feet. We've estimated the percent invasive cover to be 70% in that area. And then, so the invasive coverage out of that 2,400 square feet ends up being 1,680. And within that, planting shrubs 5 foot on center ends up with a total quantity of 78. So you go through and you're looking at all these different areas of square footage that we've identified on site. And we've come up with total quantities, like essentially per area, per buffer zone. So as an example, we have within the 25-foot no disturb zone, we have essentially 438. But we have, we're going to be planting additional restoration live stakes as well. And live stakes are things like elderberry and buttonbush and red twig dogwood that you can essentially go out and like this early spring and the late fall and essentially stick these dormant twigs essentially into the ground and they'll root. So that's why our quantity has gone up to around 500 in that area. So there is a commitment to revegetate, especially along that 25-foot no disturb. And then as you move out from there, obviously you get into areas of the garden that are in through here and areas of the houses and open lawns. So that is our restoration strategy.
Yeah. Now, while you clearly don't have responsibility for the vegetation on adjacent parcels, it also seems clear that the invasive extends into those other parcels, right?
Into these,
And so what is
sure.
the prognosis then if you deal with it on this parcel and yet it's still right there next door?
Sure. I mean, it's something that we always deal with, whether
Yeah.
we're in like urban Cambridge and there's not Japanese knotweed coming underneath someone else's fence, right?
Right.
Or seeds of black swallowwort, coming against the side of the house. So this is, it's really just about maintenance and monitoring long-term on this site, right? So there's a 3-year order of conditions. So this will be maintained, obviously, over that order. And typically what we do within the certificate of compliance is ask the NRC for, a maintenance into perpetuity, essentially. So like you're always having some need,
Yeah.
for management, Although I will say that, like, you know, a small bittersweet sprout that's coming up because a bird has flown over and dropped that seed, or, you know, wind has blown in a seed, is a lot different than some of the density of like existing vines that are currently in, you know, some of these areas alongside the property line.
Yeah, it takes 10 years or more, probably.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there are any other questions from the board. I mean, I think this is the first time we've seen a plan like this. I'm trying to remember if I've seen an invasive mitigation plan for a
Typically because it's not within your
jurisdiction to see it, but
Nice to see.
yeah, I think it is good to see. Yeah. Okay. So, I think what we need to do at this point, because I think that now we've seen this twice in effect, there have been some minor changes, but I think we need to go through the PRD criteria and to evaluate, you know, what the board's view is on each of these things so that Elizabeth can prepare our recommendation to the ZBA. And then I think we'll also need to give an indication of whether that's pro or con as a board. I'm thinking that this may be a good opportunity, though, before we deliberate on that, to just open up for comments from the public. And so I think we'll do that for a bit. What I'd like to say to the public is that obviously, you know, we've been around the block a few times with this project before. There have been changes. You know, we are interested in feedback on the plan as it stands today, and especially if it's based upon changes that have been made since any prior comments were made. So hoping to avoid a lot of repetitious comment from prior meetings, you know, except for with regards to changes or lack thereof, you know, in resolving issues that have been raised, for example. Also, I just wanted to note for the group that we do also have the library addition project tonight. This isn't our only piece of business, so we will try to be as efficient as possible. So I hope you can take that in the spirit. So anyone from the public would like to weigh in? Thanks. Yes. Identify yourself and where you live, please.
Okay. My name is Mark Galis. I live at 62 Prescott Road. I'm going to talk primarily about a lack of something that I think would be needed for this to be advantageous for the neighborhood. Section 10 of the zoning bylaw that talks about planned residential development says that it should be harmonious with neighborhood development and not detract from the ecological and visual qualities of the area. Overall site design and amenities should enhance the quality of living for the residents of the development, the immediate neighborhood, and the town generally. My question is, who determines what is suitable for the neighborhood? I submit that it should really be the neighborhood. I think there's a very broad consensus in the neighborhood and in the town more generally that the present value of the existing mature trees is something that we would really hate to see destroyed. I respectfully disagree with the answer that the landscape designer submitted in terms of the number of trees to be cut down, non-invasive, because concentrating just on the area of the upland outside of the 50-foot wetlands no-build zone from the applicants online submitted to the town pre- and post-development plans, I count more than 42 mature evergreens ranging in caliber from 26 to 24 inch to 18, 12, et cetera, down to 8, for a total of 613 caliber inches. And if I look at the latest landscape design I saw posted online, in that same area, outside of the wetlands no-build zone, I see a plan to replace the 613 with 122, or 1/5 of the caliber inches. And my concern is that for a period of 30 or 50 years, while these trees, the new trees would, hopefully grow to the same height as existing trees, the generation of people and multiple generation of animals are gonna be denied the value of this. These trees form a link in an ecological network in this area. There's wildlife corridor. I submit that gardens are not something that people usually encourage animals to go into by means of fencing or other more nasty methods. So I just want to respectfully say that the neighborhood would really consider it a major harm to, majority of people in the neighborhood consider a major harm to be removing these mature trees. As far as the arborist report that I saw saying that they're not specimen trees, I mentioned that to a friend and he said, well, okay, I get it, Mark, you're not Mozart, so you're not worth worrying about much. And I would also like to submit a copy to the board and one for the file of 67 signatures of neighbors supporting saving mature trees on the site. I just got 3 more signatures I didn't have a chance to copy. So on the order, 69, 70 signatures. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Name and
David
address.
Negrin, 40 Bronson Way. I just have a few things to show on the butter. There's a little bit of history in this situation, and I put together some time. First of all the trees that are being taken, first of all, I wanted to mention that Kim has absolutely been terrific. On my particular property, one second, I'm gonna lose an amazing amount because the way that that's good. The way that this was designed, everything was pushed over to get as much as he could to get space in, which in order to do that, I am affected greatly. And as for the neighborhood and what was just mentioned, it's so many trees that are being lost. The big conifers, which absorb more, take up more water than a regular deciduous tree. If you take the amount of trees that are gonna be taken out and you multiply, even if you deduct it, you got anywhere from 100 to 200,000 gallons of water that can't be replaced. Younger trees take up water much faster, but older trees take up much more water. So that's a great loss. It's great that they're putting in so many trees, but it's gonna really possibly affect the water table. This is the only dry spot. This is my property right here. If you look, now, Kim is gonna put trees behind the ones that aren't in native invasives. That's, really wonderful. But everything where I live and this area is so natural that it's a shame to change it. And again, this was designed and everything pushed over to this spot. So the end result is they don't have any place to put snow. So this is where snow is. And for me, right here, and not because I've done anything, all my snow is the length of this and piled in right literally next to these trees. And what do I have right over here? I have water. This is what my yard looks like. I have no sump pumps, but I have excuse me?
Over here too.
What, can you see?
We can see the
I'll do it on this
your
side.
hand.
I have no sump pumps, but what I do have is a drain that goes into the backyard. It takes all the water until right under this, right over here, I have 24 inches and I have it chronicled. I have the letter I submitted, 24 inches below my garage and my studio is water. So you have the snow here, you have my snow, and you have trees being removed, even though trees are gonna be replaced. There is no way that with with the snow being put here, that I'm not gonna be affected. Plus, the snow is being put literally next to the trees. That snow is gonna be plowed right here, and the salt is gonna go right into these new trees, and they're never gonna last. And studies show that they last 3 to 4 years. We're guaranteed by this property that in in what's been submitted that 2 years. They're guaranteeing the trees for 2 years. So I'm very much concerned that I don't stand a chance. The water floods and goes into my garage. And here's an example of what it looks like. If you look at this, that's the back of my property. That's wetland. Now we have the only dry spot. This is the other side of my property. Here I am pumping. This is what it looks like. Snow is here. His snow is somewhere over here. Much more snow than I have. You're telling me that in the middle of the winter, some tired man is gonna take that snow and he's gonna put it exactly? It's gonna go right into the trees. If he's gonna put it there, there should be a barrier to prevent the snow from getting into the trees. And it says it in the mass stormwater. It says that you can't put water, it says it can't put water in an infiltration, you can't put snow into an infiltration basin or where there's trees. So we have this situation here. There's also and you can just see, this is exactly what happens and goes in. And on the other side of my property, I get water there. So there's two sides of my property that get water.
Okay, and I think you'll need to end soon because
you know what?
we're short of time.
This is something that I put 20 years into it. All this stuff, if it does work, the shrubs and everything that's gonna be put, I'll be 80. Big deal. I'm not gonna be here for 20 or 30 years. So, we talk about trees, but let's see what they really look like. This is my property. And Miles who didn't submit anything on the invasives, is thoroughly unclear, unlike Kim. All these trees are coming out. He wasn't clear. He's gonna put little shrubs in here. This is my backyard. And this is what you're gonna see. Take a look. Look at all those trees. Everything is butted up against this. Would you like this, for all of this to come out on your property? It's incredible. There's no other words to describe it. You got snow behind here. All of this is coming out. Behind there is a field. I don't even know if trees are being planted there. People could just come onto my property. I have no protection whatsoever. I just still can't believe it. So,
Okay.
You take a look.
Okay.
All big trees, all these giant trees, some of them are invasive, are gonna come out. And especially over here, all of that is coming out. So when I look in my backyard, I'll see things this high. When I'm 80, they might be this high.
Okay, thank you.
Well, look, this has taken me 20 years. I understand that all of you, it's voluntary, and I extremely appreciate it. But I've been put in a lot of time and a lot of aggravation in this. And I believe that it's unfortunate that this is a PRD and doesn't benefit the neighborhood, even though they did whatever they could to do a great job at the expense of me and Janet Ernie, which Zor is now selling the house next door. That house, which is over here. That house right here, the trees are coming out. Giant trees are coming out. She's selling her house. She's moving as a result of this.
Excuse me.
I can't get into client detail, but that's not the reason why she's moving. I'm sorry.
All right, but, and also, I think we need to
It's fine.
conclude and let someone else speak. Okay, thank you. Any other speakers from the audience?
And the last thing is I would like to speak to Miles, if it's possible, as Kim made herself available. Miles told me that when they put it in, whatever they're gonna put in, he'll consult with me. I need to know now. It doesn't do me any good. I would like him to be as cooperative as Kim is.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
Is it-
can you identify yourself and where you
Brian
live?
Jones, 374 Sudbury Road.
Okay,
Is the main reason all these trees have to be cut down, there can be no discrimination of picking a certain ones, because of just economic considerations, you can't design a new thing with trees around? Or is it mainly just because they don't fit? It looks to me so the houses fit pretty well. But can't they retain some of these trees, especially at this corner, to help this man out? And why they just take every tree in sight? I see that all over town. They just blaze right through a whole lot of these trucks, carry away these huge limbs of trees. And you talk to the people, they say, oh, they said they were rotten all the way through. Yeah, sure.
Okay, other comments from the public? Yes.
Cindy Mara, 400 Old Bedford Road. I live on the southern border, and Kim and I met yesterday, and I thank her very much for all her time. She had wonderful suggestions, and as much as I'm thrilled to have, I'm used to privacy on my property. I don't have, we've been there 25 years, people aren't walking down our side property, so her changes with vegetation will give us a little bit more privacy, so I really appreciate that. Also, the improvements and changes to the original design are very much well appreciated. The fact that there are less buildings. I still have a few concerns. David talked about water, it's a high water table, so there are definitely concerns for that. If you include, introducing more basements and septics, you put stuff in the ground where the water's gonna go, I'm concerned about losing trees. I'm happy that they're putting some in, and Kim's very gifted at placing them and making it all look very nice, and I think that's great. But the fact cluster housing, generally, we were there when Millers were there. What I would like is a family moved into the house and the barn and raised a daughter like the Millers did. That probably isn't gonna happen. But that unit 3 is like 4,000 square feet facing my side property, so that's a concern. And I very much like, this landscaping work has been wonderful, and Kim is very knowledgeable and totally willing to work with us, which is great. David spoke a little bit about the mitigation plan. I looked at so I was trying to look at that for the amount of detail that we've gotten from Kim, and David spoke about it a little bit. It's all in great detail, graphically and with detail on the side from Kim. The mitigation plan, I looked at the land management plan today. There's a lot of very interesting information in there, talking about different plants and different trees, and it's very in light of, it's wonderful. But as you look at this, I don't see the detail, I don't see a graphic bird's eye view like Kim has presented. So I was happy to hear Miles talk a little bit about the number of plantings, but just before that, I wasn't sure what was gonna go in from the end of what the Kim has designed all the way down to the pond. That's all our property there. And if all that stuff gets ripped out, I'm not really sure exactly, it sounded like he had some, little bit of detail on the side. And the plan that I saw talked about the types of plants that would go into different 25, 50 foot, 100 foot length, but it's kind of nice to see this. Like Kim shows you exactly what they're gonna put in, and I haven't really seen exactly that, so I would appreciate that, and I'm guessing it would come from Miles, so, thank you.
Okay.
I'm gonna jump in there. That plan is outside of the purview of the planning board. That plan is outside of the purview of the Board of Appeals. That is part of their order of conditions through the Natural Resources Commission, and they have full jurisdiction over that invasive removal and planting plan. There's also, as far as how you go about doing invasive removals and planting, it's not the same as planting. They work with removing things and planting things as they go through that process. It is a process that is supervised by Natural Resources staff and reports through that whole process. So I really want to make that clear. If there is questions about the actual plan, I know the Natural Resources Director would be happy to meet with anybody to go over specifically how those invasive removal plans, how they start, how they go about, how they work. And that's something that she would be happy to sit down and talk with anybody about.
But to the extent that trees are being removed around the periphery of the property, isn't that within our purview?
As far as invasive removals,
No,
No.
in terms of tree removal specifically, not independent of the question of invasives.
so only if, you're talking about the PRD project and what's happening with the PRD project, not with the invasive removals.
Sure. Go ahead, here, second row, and then I know there's someone in the third row, so,
Oh, me? Okay.
okay.
Holly Miller, 374 Old Bedford Road. I am in a letter to the project. As I understand that you're going to grapple with this question of what is diversity of unit types. But I think to allow this sort of tenuous connection between the barn and the farmhouse to classify these front two units as a multifamily or a two-family unit, I think sets a very bad precedent. So we just wanted to weigh in on that. And, also, I think, just as we consider this PRD, I think we all need to think about what our vision is for the future of Concord. And each of these developments set the precedent, and, this is what we want our town to be. I think, I appreciate this is an improvement over the original 8-unit and 7-unit development, but I think from the neighborhood perspective, it's still too dense. So,
Okay, second row, please.
Yeah, Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road. In fact, I was going to mention, segue the discussion about purviews, that the NRC specifically said the trees in the upland portion were the planning board's purview.
Board of Appeals.
Well,
This is a special permit through the Board of Appeals. The
I-
planning board is only making a recommendation.
For the
Yes,
recommendation.
Yes.
Well, yes, I'm just quoting the chair of the Natural Resources Commission. They refused to comment on the trees. They even claimed they were experts in it, which is appalling as a statement. But they did say that is for the planning board to opine on. Okay, is that? But they did say purview, right? So I'm just saying what they said. They also said upon some questions that there is no guarantee for preventing flooding, and we can't guarantee it. We just do our best as committees and boards, and whatever happens, we can't guarantee anything. We just do our best. I have a concern that I raised at the time but didn't get answered because there was a lot going on, which is that I remember the applicants were considering saving some of the trees behind the barn, and then that didn't happen because of the report that if you remove some of those trees, the others will also get compromised. So I am wondering if the same would be an issue with the trees that are going to be preserved but the invasives removed there. And this is just a technical concern that the existing trees may be compromised from that process. And that wasn't answered or addressed. The connection between trees and flooding, tree removal and flooding removal that was asked during your November 13th meeting is a general question, and it was not disclosed at the time that there was in fact discussions going on with the third-party reviewers at the time, whose report eventually does express a concern about removal of trees and flooding. And the point is that then it would be more in the discussion. On May 21st, when this conceptual plan was presented, the chair at the time did say, we will pass 4,000 square feet as empty nester, but the trees need to be preserved. That was completely ignored while they were discussing things with the Natural Resources Department and possibly and later in their presentation. And I also want to mention that our support collection efforts, like the signatures, these were all done over the weekend. A lot, 60 of those signatures at least were by door-to-door walking effort. And we were up to that point, hoping that they would have listened to the planning board advice from May 21st and saved some of the trees. So we are very disappointed that that request is being ignored. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
Leonard Solomon, 498 Old Bedford Road. I just want to say I second the feeling that the trees should be preserved as much as possible. I'm not a direct abutter. I'm one lot over as the crow flies, 498. And we do have a problem with flooding, and here we're putting in another septic field and removing trees. So that can only make the situation a little bit worse. I just wanted to say I second the prevailing opinion.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one simple question, that's all and that's regarding this right here. On the back of my property, Miles, do you know if any of these trees are gonna be saved, or are they all coming down and putting in bushes?
We are preserving some of those trees. Kim has talked to you about.
Well,
preserving some of those
you
trees.
can't really tell on your plan, and Kim's plan was very extensive.
Okay, I think we can,
Have that kind of.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're done with public comment. I did have, I think, a number of follow-up items that I'd like to ask the applicant about, and perhaps other board members may have as well. I think there was a point made about the caliper of trees removed versus planted, but the numbers didn't really seem to make sense with me because, Kim, you were saying that, there's a planting of 126 trees, and I think minimum caliper would be 2 inches. So that would give, a number of 250 at minimum for the caliper being planted. I assume must be more than that even.
There are 3-inch caliper minimums.
Okay.
Plants, the trees, the deciduous and the evergreens.
Right.
And I went through the plant list many times and added number of trees and then the caliper inches.
Right. And so what did your numbers come up with?
So I came up with 359 caliper inches.
To be planted.
To be planted.
Okay. Thank you.
366 are being eliminated, so we're close.
Okay, so it's a 1-to-1 roughly ratio of
Yes,
caliper
it doesn't
in theory.
include the other trees that Miles is putting in the buffer zone, so that it would end up being at least 1-to-1.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, might I just clarify the number that I stated? The 613? That's only the mature evergreens in the upland area outside of the 50-foot wetland. Doesn't then count 40 plus deciduous trees, doesn't count any of the trees in other areas. So in other words, when I said there were 120 versus 613, that's only evergreens, and it's only in the uplands outside of the 50-foot. So I'm not, those are not comparable.
Yeah, clearly the numbers, okay. So the next question is, I think for our engineer, there was an assertion about the snow storage exacerbating the flooding problem on the next lot. But I thought my understanding was that runoff can't come off of the lot. So can you comment about the impact of the?
Sure. So basically, the snow storage areas have to be located, and the site has to be graded in such a way that the snow is melting into the stormwater system, which is melting towards the T turnaround there and to the catch basins, and then through the treatment units into the on-site stormwater system. So it's not melting in that direction.
Okay. And then I guess, Kim, you had referred to the number of trees, I think in response to Burton's question about, the number to be taken down. But was that exclusively in the area that you're talking about, not the area in which the consultant here was talking about? Are there additional trees to be taken down in that area? And what is the grand total number on the lot? I guess.
That one was complicated.
Yeah, because of the bed in that area, yeah. There's not an extensive amount of invasive trees on the site. There's like a few scattered Norway maples on the
Right.
site.
And so you're not going to take down anything that's not an invasive tree in that zone, is what you're saying.
That's correct, and we're required by NRC to remove all invasive plant species on
Of course. Okay. Then I had another question, which is about the attached dwelling. So with the engineer's comments, it sounded like the applicant would like to maintain that attached dwelling setup, that you're not actually putting that up just for the sake of putting it
The
up.
applicant would like to have it separate, but
Of course, but it sounds like your go-forward plan is that they be attached. I think I just wanted to get clear on that, given the discussion that we had. Let's see. Other questions?
Well, I was gonna say, to the point that there's an issue with septic, if attaching them allows for the sewage off of the barn
Well, it sounded
to be
like that's
tied to
what
the
they're
city
going.
sewer, then that resolves that.
Well, it
to some
gives
small
that
extent.
dimension of diversity as well.
Well,
So
yeah.
it's a question,
That-
from the
That part
technical
I'm less
standpoint.
about, since it's just a
Sure,
tiny
I
attachment,
understand.
it feels like
Well, and
it's-
then I just wanted to clarify, just from a point of our bylaws about attached dwellings, because we actually have already done some change to our bylaws where there was this notion of a pergola attaching 2 units. Now we actually have to have a common, wall, but we don't yet specify how much overlap that has to be. That's just the nature of our bylaws as it stands today. I think we have had discussions on the board about possibly tightening that up, and we may. But as it stands today, that's what it says. Okay, other comments from the board? Yeah.
Well, there's, for discussion.
Sure,
For discussion.
yes.
So, I mean, there's 2 points that I think that we haven't talked about. Well, the applicant clearly heard that the request was for less density, and square footage has decreased substantially. But, in terms of diversity, I don't know of any other planned residential developments around with this theme around sustainable agriculture, and I think that point should not be overlooked in terms of diversity. And the size of the plot, the garden plot, if it can be established that everybody is preserving as many trees as possible, because clearly that is an issue for a number of things, then I hope that the plots can be as large as they can be, and hopefully that becomes some sort of a sustainability thing in the future. We're growing our own food. We're not transporting, food from other locations, and a number of things. We don't call out agriculture in terms of sustainability, but I think we should think about that. I do think that when we're looking for common ground on this, clearly the applicant and for the homeowners who are going to be here, they want it to be not flooding, and they want it to be beautiful. They want it to be healthy, a healthy environment. So I do think there's common grounds in terms of the new vegetation, the new trees that are coming in. It's just that change is hard for everyone. And we live in an area where there are quite a few wetlands. And there's a lot of people, whose basements flood and things like that, and have flooded for many years. I don't think it's anybody's intent to make it worse, but I think we need to look at, plans for, as we make changes to our neighborhoods, how we can do that in the best possible way. So I just want to make sure we capture a lot of the good things about this. I do miss that there were smaller units, but again, the applicant was responding to the things that he heard that people wanted, and I think he did the best that he could.
Thank you. Other comments from the board? I think we could just walk through the criteria of 10.4.2 to kind of see if we've covered off on each of these things, and make sure that we've got guidance for Elizabeth as she writes up the report. So I think that the first point, the 10.4.2.1 is just really descriptive. 10.4.2.2 gets into basically, does this provide the right kind of circulation, the location and capacity of parking, provisions for grading, landscaping, and screening. So there have been several changes that have been made about landscaping and screening, and we've heard comments from the public about that. Any comments from the board on those issues? Everybody satisfied? The next is 10423, the degree to which the proposed PRD provides a range of diversity of the size of units. And diversity really here is specifically to the
Size of the
units. As it relates to increased density that may be permitted. I think we've clearly identified that the number of units is appropriate given the PRD bylaw. I think it's really the only open questions around the diversity of units, and so I'd entertain any remarks on that.
I think the comment you said earlier about when you're talking about 4 units instead of 8 or 7, the diversity you can expect where all your units are market rate because you're under the floor for bonus density.
Yeah.
This is about what you can expect. I think under our current zoning laws, we've talked a lot on this board about incentivizing smaller houses, missing middle, and the like.
Yeah.
I think under the zoning rules as we have them today, when there's pressure to reduce the overall number of units, it provides fewer options in terms of housing choice when you have 4 units. So I think within the requirements of the current PRD, we're seeing other elements of diversity of units in terms of ground floor bedrooms, upper floor bedrooms, focus on farming, the clustering that I think are meeting the spirit of the bylaw.
And also to build off of that, when 2 out of the 4 units are existing dwellings, and you're having to work with that to maintain the frontage appearance.
Okay.
Kind of limited.
Any other comments? All right, so now let's move to 10424, and basically this is evaluating the degree to which any land that's either conveyed for, restricted, or for the benefit of the town. And so this is, additions of open space between developed sections of town, land desirable for future public use, conforms to the long-range land use plan. So,
on this point, I think this is very clear. If you were to compare this against similar to, you can easily criticize what's on the screen, but if you compare it to what it could be, and you compare it to, for example, the adjacent subdivision that's immediately to the north of there, where it's 4 houses that are more disparately spaced around a actually slightly smaller original lot than this. This clustering provides that corridor, preserves the pond, and I think goes towards that idea behind a PRD of allowing the clustered houses to preserve more open space, especially compared to other PRD projects we've seen, which are larger in scale. This seems to be, and it's in part because they're not going above the base density. We're seeing a lot more preserved open space.
okay, any other comment on that one? My comment would be on this too, that specifically with this lot, that existing streetscape of the farmhouse with its barn and with the paddock that provides a view into open land, it preserves kind of this agrarian vista, that is increasingly rare, and that to me is a major amenity to the most recent design that wasn't maintained previously with the 7 and 8 unit designs. And to me, that goes a long way to offset some of the other concerns that I have. And just as Burton said, I have to think about the alternative to this plan, which preserves the farmhouse and barn and preserves that sight line, to what would likely be a subdivision form of development that would raise the house and barn and would eliminate any kind of street space view. So to me, that I have to think about the alternative. If there aren't further comments on that, so then it gets back to, is this a suitable site design, development layout, number, type, and design of housing for this neighborhood in which it's located?
And I think it meets it. Again, you've got the farm across the street. I'm hearing neighbors' comments, and it sounds largely about not wanting a higher water table, wanting to make sure there's not more flooding as a result of, more buildings, more construction, and I can understand that. I certainly don't want to see the loss of mature trees. I don't think anybody does, but I think we've heard that there's some trees that by law have to be removed. And I feel like we have to kind of balance all those things, plus the kind of that next generation of healthy trees to be put in.
Any other comments on this? I mean, I think in terms of suitability for the neighborhood, clearly the house and barn that are on, that are 2 of the 4 units that are pre-existing. So they are the neighborhood. It's really a question of, does adding these 2 additional units back behind and then this garden setup, does that disrupt, in effect, the neighborhood? And I think that the comments we've heard from abutters, are about the loss of screening, the concerns about flooding, really not so much about the units themselves, the addition of those units. And I would say that, again, the main thing that's on my mind is this versus whatever else might be put there.
Yeah, that's what.
And so I think, again, this is the preservation aspects relative to the pattern for the neighborhood seem like they tilt the balance, for me anyway.
Yeah, I keep coming back to, if it's going to be developed, is this sort of the best possible outcome? And I think, we started at something that wasn't there. We've moved here, and this is, really, again, from a streetscape perspective, from listening to the abutters and their concerns and trying to work with them, I think we've come a long way, and this is, a good potential outcome, I think.
I'd also note, one of the early concerns was not raised tonight was the traffic issue with that intersection, which seems to be largely resolved by this latest plan.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked the question about snow melt and where that was going to go. I think that is an important point to have been heard.
Okay. So then that just brings us to the recommendation. So do we direct Elizabeth to write up our report recommending the grant of the special permit or denying it? So I guess those who...
So from a procedural standpoint, the application is on the agenda for the Zoning Board of Appeals for this Thursday evening. Typically, how the schedules work, we try and do 2 meetings for the planning board before the Board of Appeals, so you can actually review your decision. So the planning board can, there's 2 options. You can designate 1 or 2 of the members to review a draft decision that would be provided to the Board of Appeals for Thursday night. All town departments, have weighed in on recommended conditions of approval, or can inform the Board of Appeals that this is your, you've made a vote for a particular recommendation, and will be preparing that at your subsequent meeting to provide it.
Yeah, and that's what I thought we were doing.
But do we want to try to have somebody review it before Thursday so they can take care of it.
No, so you
Right.
can either have one or two members review
Right.
it, review your recommendation, and then submit it to the Board of Appeals on behalf of the board for this Thursday, or you can just inform the board that you have made a vote in this direction for your recommendation and will be preparing a written recommendation with.
Yeah, and that
And then we
seems like
would
a
review
better
that all together.
procedure
And you
because
would do that all together at your next meeting.
because
in
it's
2 weeks.
unlikely that the ZBA is going to vote on on Thursday on this to grant
What-
or
I don't-
deny the special permit. I doubt that they would be doing that in one meeting.
They would not take a vote without your formal recommendation.
Right. But you think they might otherwise?
I don't think they will vote without your recommendation.
But if we had one or two people look it over and then provide the recommendation by Thursday, right?
They could
Might.
vote on a recommend, you know.
Right. I just don't
recommendation.
know if that's even necessary. I guess to have an expedited
Two
procedure.
people would constitute a committee and require the subcommittee of
No,
the whole-
no, it wouldn't. Not.
Only if the board voted to have a subcommittee. And if one member reviews it and provides comments, and another member reviews it and provides comments, I could have all 6 members review and provide me comments, so long as they are not deliberating amongst themselves.
Exactly.
So 2 members, 6 members, 5 members could review a draft recommendation tomorrow, Thursday morning, individually provide me their comments that I would incorporate into a final recommendation to the Board of Appeals. That is not a violation of open meeting law.
Not if it's individual.
If they individually send me their comments,
Yes,
it is not a
that's right.
violation.
Okay.
That's right.
So
Thank you.
so please point of order. Let's. Okay. So we. I mean, I know that I personally cannot review such a decision if there are those who could, but again, I don't know if it's really even called for. I mean, it just seems like,
Stay with your original
I
thought.
just
then.
feel like,
That's fine.
why
Yeah.
not just have a written decision? I'm just surprised that we need to just expedite this, but.
I don't think we do. I think you were
normally
just
we would
giving
hear
us our
from the
options, right?
applicant
Just
if
giving
we
you your
needed to do
Yeah,
so.
that's fine.
Okay.
The only matter that the board has not discussed that was raised in the report is the fire chief's recommendation that the road, the driveway actually be named. So
Oh,
that the
yeah.
addresses can be.
In fact, I had meant to ask the applicant about that suggested name, the Hatch Farm Lane.
At what,
Ready
Flint
for
name.
one now.
I was gonna say, at what
No,
point do you
well,
have to do that?
So the planning board is the one that, through your jurisdiction as far as subdivisions, works with the fire chief, historical commission, and is the one that is charged with, that
Coming up with
process
names,
of
huh?
coming up with
Did not
names
know that.
for a road.
I thought it had a pretty nice ring personally, but that was
So
just me.
it's, the applicant doesn't get to choose a name.
Oh, they don't.
It doesn't work that way.
I like
Really?
the Hatley
I think
or
that-
whatever it was.
Does the
Waldo
applicant get
Lane.
to suggest any other
Hold
names?
it.
So
In
that we
the
have more than
report, it
someone
said
to
that the
consider?
applicant objected to Waldo Lane.
Well,
Okay, so it
I didn't
seems
say
like
the
they
applicant
did get
objected.
some
I said
opportunity to weigh in. I think I think it's worth asking the question.
The
Just
board would
personally.
like to entertain Waldo Lane. I'm not.
Because then whenever anybody lived there, they'd say, "Where's Waldo?"
So yes, yeah. So the applicant can, suggest certain names.
Okay, I was just wondering if there was a range option.
Typically, the town of Concord has looked to historic nature of a property
Yeah.
when naming of a road. And sadly, even though this is Mr. Flint built the house, we already have a Flint Road, so.
When does it need to be done? Like when does the road naming take place?
It should be part of the final
Okay.
special permit, so that when it gets recorded.
Okay, so that's another reason.
Conflict of interest.
So
I'm
that
not
would
related
be,
to Waldo.
that would be another reason, that the board can include in their comments to the Board of Appeals that you're gonna be preparing your written recommendation, as well as finalizing with the applicant, potential names, for the
Sounds good.
driveway.
All right, so
All right. So can we get a sense of the board so that Elizabeth can write this up and then, so,
Since the board, I would vote in favor of the proposal and make a recommendation to the zoning board of appeals to approve the special permit request. That would be my position, and I beyond the things already covered in Elizabeth's report, I wouldn't have any further requirements.
I would vote in favor.
Favor.
okay, I think we're unanimous on that then.
Okay, I will put something together and
All right, thanks.
send it off.
Okay. So thanks to those of you who came for this item. If you are leaving at this time, please exit the building if you can to avoid disruption of the next topic. And so I'd like to call our 7:30 item, approximately 55 minutes later, which is the preliminary subdivision plan number 245. The application of Douglas Sears, trustee for Ann and T. Sears Trust for a 2-lot subdivision on 3.78 acres, which sounds remarkably similar size, off of 136 Barnes Hill Road. Is there someone representing the applicant for this?
There is.
Is this the first time you saw a preliminary subdivision plan?
Who's here for this one?
I think so.
Somebody here for this one?
Because I think it might be the first time. Okay. I think this is the first time that I'm looking at a preliminary subdivision plan.
Yeah, no.
Same here.
Okay, so if there's anything different.
That would have to be the case.
Right, well, I didn't know if your memory was better than mine. Well, I was gonna give you that. So if there's anything different that you're aware of, let us know.
Okay. Go right ahead. We're just getting warmed up.
Where would you like us to sit?
You can sit anywhere. I think when people present, they'll step up to the front. Yeah. Hi. Could you identify yourself and tell us about your project?
My name is Robert Di Benedetto. I'm a civil engineer with Hancock Associates. And I'm here representing Doug Sears, who's a member of the Ann Sears Trust. They're the owners of the property at 136 Barnes Hill Road. What we are proposing is a 2-lot subdivision on the property, currently about a 4-acre lot. And if you don't mind, can you bring up the one that says EC on there? There's a proposed one, a base one, and there's another one that was sent. It'll show essentially an existing conditions in that color. Oh, if it's not there, that's fine. I can talk about it with what's here as well.
Oh, this one?
The email I sent to you.
There you go.
There you go.
There we go. So the existing lot is a single-family house with a roadway connecting to Barnes Hill Road. It has municipal water, municipal electric, and it has an on-site septic system. What we are proposing is, again, a 2-lot subdivision, and as part of the submittal for their preliminary application, we provided a base plan which does not require any waivers or variances. And
That's what had been up there a minute ago. Yeah, I hope so.
So that alignment shows a fully compliant right-of-way with a 50-foot right-of-way, 22-foot width, and a full turnaround.
Do you need a different plan up there?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
And for that, was that confirmed that that didn't need any waivers or variances from
It's the
the
other
town
one that's
planner, or
already
how was that
It might just
confirmed?
be the one
Yes,
with the prop.
was,
Oh, that's it.
This one?
Yeah, that looks good.
it was determined from the building inspections that the zoning as currently laid out here conforms to all the zone requirements for setbacks, for the roadway alignment.
And like, so the roadway grade is not
What's shown
very
here,
extreme?
no, what's shown here, we're allowed a maximum of 8% in the roadway, as allowed here for this kind of road, and we're showing that 8%. And we also have a minimum vertical curve provided here, and then a curve on the other side to go to the roundabout itself. And we're also showing it within a 50-foot right-of-way. We're also providing municipal water, municipal underground electric, gas to connect at a future time in Barnesville Road. And then we'd have on-site septic system for the proposed houses. Those are located both here and here. The roadway is has its own stormwater management system, which is supplied right here through a series of catch basins, and then a connection to a sediment forebay and a surface basin, which then outfalls into McCombs Pond. That has been sized to handle all storms based on the areas that are reaching that. For the houses themselves, with whatever development they would incur, they would have their own infiltration systems on site. And those are allowed to be underground infiltration systems, which would be handling roof drainage and any runoff from the driveways themselves. So this plan is the base plan, the plan without any request for waivers. The next plan is what we are proposing, and ultimately we're asking for waivers with respect to the right-of-way design.
Okay, and just to catch Elizabeth up, while you're out of the room, he was saying that the building commissioners reviewed this plan and deemed that according to current zoning, that this wouldn't require waivers. It would be within the, the realm, like it's got an 8% grade on the driveway, the base plan, not this
But he
plan.
just said it.
That, he was only speaking to zoning, so it would only deal with frontage and area of
My
the
apologies,
lot.
I might have misunderstood what you were asking for there. The roadway we were requesting for the base plan is conforming to the requirements based on that, which is why we're not requesting any waivers, the maximum 8%.
So I'll
in our
clarify the terminology. The layout of the base plan is compliant with your subdivision rules and regs,
Okay,
which the building commissioner does not review.
okay.
His comment is that for the plan, for both plans, that if waivers were requested, this lot has the required frontage, meets the required frontage along a road right-of-way, which is the new road layout, and it has the required area. It meets the width where the front of the house is located. His review is only with zoning, not subdivision rules and regs.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So with this proposed alignment, as you were saying, the houses are placed within the setbacks provided by this proposed alignment. Both lots are greater than the minimum required, which is 1 acre, 60,000 square feet. And the right-of-way we're requesting here is a little smaller as part of one of our waivers, because we're essentially reducing the width of this roadway. And the reason for it is twofold. One, we believe that a roadway that's providing access for just two houses is essentially just a slightly larger driveway. And to that end, we would like to see more of a driveway setting for this. And also, by reducing this, we're also reducing the amount of impervious area and the amount of grading required around there in order to create it. To that end, we're requesting a reduction in the width to 16 feet. Something that wasn't on the plan, but we're also requesting a removal of the required sidewalk. This is because Barnesville Road doesn't have any sidewalk of its own. And again, for two houses, we don't feel that there's a need for a sidewalk just for the two houses. We're also requesting a waiver from the maximum 8% to increase to 10%. This would bring it to the maximum as allowed in 527 CMR, which talks about the, among other things, the maximum slope for fire trucks, which they allow at 10%. We're also changing the roundabout to provide this kind of 3-point turn, and which would allow, this was analyzed using the swept path analysis, which shows that a fire truck can can approach on one side, back up in this direction, and then turn around and go out. And it can do it in either direction. And we've shown in our computer models that this can be done using a Concord fire truck that was supplied to us by the fire department. We had an analysis done for the for the
Site distance.
Thank you. For the site distance analysis that was performed for this to show that the approach on either side would be done in its current alignment. However, there would likely be a couple trees that would have to be cut down during the construction of this roadway here in order to ensure that we have the access. Those trees are within the right-of-way of Barnes Hill Road. This design, much like the waiver list plan that we showed before, also has an on-site stormwater management system up here with a sediment forebay and with a surface basin. Water is collected in deep sump catch basins and directed there. Each of the houses, with whatever design they have, will have their own drainage systems as needed. There is also room for on-site septic systems. These have been preliminarily designed to account for a 4 or 5 bedroom house and with worse soil conditions, just to give ourselves an idea of what kind of footprint they would be taking up. Ideally, it would not need this much room, but we're preparing for the worst in that case.
Because you haven't done the testing to
That's
understand.
correct. No soils analysis has been done for this yet. That would be the next step in terms of going for the definitive.
Going between the, okay.
Preliminary and definitive. We'd also be supplying underground water. I noted that one of the comments was to have separate water lines towards Barnes Hill Road. That would not be a problem. It would just be following the course of the driveway. We'd also have underground electric and gas hookup for a future connection.
What percentage of the lot, what area of the lot would need to be regraded?
We're looking at about, I'd say about 2 acres of disturbance, so about 50% of the lot. And some of it would just be very minimal. There are pockets where there's no regrading required, although the tree would, of course, be cut down there to provide, in this case, a drainage basin, but no grading would have to be required there. The extent of the tree cutting for this is approaching the property line on this side. In the previous version, this was encroaching a lot closer to the property line in order to account for the larger right-of-way, which again is another reason why we're requesting the smaller width.
But it's essentially a forested lot right now, right? It looks like,
yes,
with the exception of a very small side yard around the existing house.
we have a side yard that kind of encompasses this area here, and then we have the driveway and the house on this part.
Okay.
So essentially, yeah, thank you. So you can see there's a tree line that is formed right here that goes around and then wraps around this way.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, we're ultimately adding a house to this 4-acre lot. There'll be a different configuration to account for the private drive to build that, but we're putting 2 houses on 4 acres is essentially what we're doing.
Yeah, I assume you read the planner report and saw the fire department's comments, and I mean, it doesn't sound like you've really responded to those here in your presentation so far. I mean, it seems like your computer models are more optimistic than our fire chief about the performance of our ladder truck.
Well, that is something that can be adjusted in this model here.
I was wondering, can you do an 8% grade? I mean, you saw in
It's
you
certainly
showed in the pro
possible.
forma that it was possible. So
With That's right, and with that original, it is possible, you would need an additional retaining wall along the side, which can certainly be done. A 4
how?
foot retaining wall can be accounted for in this area.
So it would only be a 4-foot wall.
Yes,
Okay.
And to retain the 8% grade.
that's
To
right.
achieve the, yeah.
Right. I mean, if it's if that is what's required by the firm, we'll certainly listen to that. Where we were using the NFPA standards of 10% maximum there.
And then the building heights, trying to meet our zoning 35-foot max heights. I mean, I
Yes,
bet you these are going to be good-sized houses, right?
This is preliminary here, so we're showing that the footprint in these locations here will work for zoning. Whatever house they end up designing will have to conform to that. And we haven't gone through that analysis here.
And you're not doing a lot of grading around the house sites.
No, we're avoiding as much as we can, especially
mounding,
on
I
the
should say.
backyard here. In this case, we're taking advantage of garage under units here. So you'd have the garage on the lower floor. That allows you to have about an 8 or 9 foot drop between your first floor and your garage floor. And that actually accounts for some of the grading you see here. This is the existing grading lines here that are hitting up against the house. We should be hitting up against the back foundation of that house there. And then you potentially have a walkout area for the garage on that side.
Yeah.
And you'd have a similar situation if needed for this, although this is a little more level, so you might not need it there. So
Yeah.
it
We're
really,
just saying, that the building height calculations are based upon the natural terrain. So
yes, and we're trying
we've
to
seen some
adhere to
cases where
that.
it could get pretty out of whack. So
Yeah. Well, in previous events we had, that wasn't taken into account. We saw, okay, if we move this too much, we're
Yeah.
actually hindering ourselves in terms of the height.
you bet.
This is taking advantage of the fact that they're at certain levels already.
Okay.
And there was a comment, I think, from NRC about the no build zone.
Yes, that was that is something that can be fixed as well. The original interpretation I had was that maintenance and things like this would be a maintenance easement around the basement would be allowed within the 50-foot no build because it was not an actual structure. However, if it says any structures related to drainage at all, including that kind of stuff, then we will certainly adhere to that as well.
How would you do that?
We would shift this east or down on the sheet to make it closer here. That would involve building some kind of wall to give us the necessary grade drop that we'd be required to in order for that to work. So that would be,
So
and also to
moving,
make it a
moving
little
that
long.
that catch basin towards the driveway and where's the
Catch basin?
or
This surface basin that is
surface
74
basin?
bay.
Sorry,
So you see the 50-foot no build is happening right here.
I see. Okay.
So there isn't much we have to do the shift of there, but we'd also elongate it in this direction
Mhm.
to give ourselves the necessary volume. And actually by bringing it this way, it works a little better with the contours to allow us the vertical that we need.
And last question, Elizabeth, dumb question, does the tree preservation bylaw apply to the subdivision lots?
It well prior to the development of them, so, is.
I'm wondering
I
how you
don't know.
calculate the building envelope versus the setback zone and when you're dividing a property, is it?
I mean, these will be separate lots that will have
Yeah.
boundaries, right?
That's
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
with
aside from
setbacks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I have it, the tree bylaw with me, so I'll have to look that up.
Okay, one question for you, Elizabeth, is it looks like we have to render a decision tonight. Is that the case?
Unless a time extension is granted by the applicant for you to review it at your
Okay.
next
What's the
meeting.
time frame that we have, normal, the submission to the
45 days.
45 days? We just haven't gotten it on our agenda up until now. Because, I mean,
No, the applicant, this application was submitted quite a few months ago.
yeah,
And it originally was submitted with 3 lots, which provided extensive issues and comments from
Yeah.
town staff.
yeah.
Which town staff, we had a full town staff review meeting with the applicant. And following that meeting, the applicant went back and redesigned to this submission, and then filed the submission and provided a grant of a time extension.
I see.
So
So the
it's that-
clock started way back with the 3-unit thing.
Right, but once
Okay,
this.
it doesn't reset to 0 when
No, it
the-
doesn't reset to
this-
0, but the applicant provided the revised plans and essentially reset that to 0 to allow
Okay.
for the review by town staff again. And, this meeting, I mean, this is only a preliminary plan. It
Sure.
doesn't, grant them any rights. It's to provide them direction.
Yeah.
on
Any
whether-
other questions for the applicant? If not, then I'd open up for questions from the public. If so, you can state your name and address and make your comment or ask your question.
Craig Merrill, 150 Barnes Hill Road. Just one question. You said 50% would be kind of affected somehow with either grading or trees. Can you be a little more clear on what 50% is mostly affected?
Well, the predominant area that will be affected is up front because we are building this roadway in this location here. And again, as it's preliminary, there are adjustments that can be made and modifications to reduce this. But in the end, because we are tying into the existing roadway, we are subject to the elevation at that point and then the maximum slope of 8% or hopefully whatever we can agree with the fire department. To that end, not using any retaining walls along this side, the encroachment is about maybe 7 to 8 feet off of the property line over here. In the no waiver model, this was essentially extended all the way to the property line in order to make that work. Now, again, adjustments can be made here if you add a retaining wall. At any point along the high side, you're increasing that by 4 feet vertical and about 8 to 9 feet horizontal, and you're reducing the amount. So in this portion, this would be removed here. Everything as you're getting closer to McCone's Pond is subject to the infiltration basin, and that is basically set as close to the 50-foot no build that we would be allowed to in order for us to get our vertical drop that we need to properly treat and contain the stormwater from the road. So majority of the tree cutting will be happening in this area. As you move further back, you would have additional grading in certain areas dependent on the development of the house. And that really ultimately is dependent on what they develop there. We're providing a conceptual design that shows a house of 40 by 80 could be put into these locations, and this is what you have to do in order to build that. But as you can see, we're also including potential retaining walls that they would need to put in their driveway. I stopped the walls here, but if these are extended, you're now minimizing the tree cut in that area. And this is here, but this can be shifted over, and there's ways to minimize that. So predominantly here, and then less on the southern side of the property.
Elizabeth has a question.
No,
Yeah.
I have an answer. To Burton's question regarding the tree preservation bylaw, it's specifically exempt for the subdivision portion of the property. So that would be for just the road layout and the drainage for the road layout. But for the actual construction of the driveways for the dwellings and all of their, the structures and the infrastructure for the dwellings themselves, it would be subject.
So basically, yeah, the houses, basically the people that are, once you create the lots and have access to the lots provided by the subdivision, then that's the sort of base conditions under which you now apply the tree preservation bylaw.
Well, so for the subdivision rules and so if somebody were to come forward with a definitive subdivision plan,
Right.
we're only talking about the actual area of the roadway within the road layout and the stormwater drainage that goes with that road layout. So
The retaining pond and
correct, and
So this part here.
and just the actual road.
okay,
So
Within the right of way, that's.
yes,
or-
so the remainder would be subject.
okay,
Um,
okay. Because this is the first one we've had since we passed that bylaw. That's why we're deliberating a little bit on this. Any other questions from the public? Okay, so any discussion among the board about this preliminary subdivision plan?
If I may, just for clarity's sake, the issues we're considering really are just limited to the requested waivers, which all go to this road layout of are reducing the right of way by 10 feet, reducing the minimum pavement width by 6 feet.
Are the waivers enumerated here in?
Yeah, on
Yeah,
page
requested
3.
waivers,
So
yeah.
those are the only issues before us, right?
Minimum right of way, minimum pavement width,
No, I mean, it's a,
maximum grade.
the applicant is going through a preliminary plan process. It's not just the waivers, but it's also, to get a sense of the board on,
The overall
the subdivision overall and moving forward with a definitive subdivision plan.
Yeah, so, I mean, if we look here, it sounds like the one that has been questioned by town staff is just the maximum grade. I haven't heard any, I mean, I've heard that there needs to be more information provided, but in terms of kind of an objection to the plan, that's the only objection that I've seen. I didn't know if board members had any perspectives on their own. I mean, so what we would be needing to do tonight, just to clarify, is two things. First of all, to identify which of these waivers that we would be prepared to grant. And then secondly, just our general sense of, yes, if you tune this up, create a definitive subdivision plan, we'll probably be able to progress it.
You'll
right?
review it.
We'll review it, but that's what I mean is that, yeah. Okay. Any other comments?
I would be inclined to go with the fire department's recommendation and concern, and rather than increase the grade, even if NFPA says 10%. I don't know if that's just their average or if it's regional based on New England. So.
Or more powerful fire engine.
Yeah, maximum allowed might be in Florida, which they wouldn't actually have that grade, but
So
I don't know.
I'm thankful for technology. The fire chief has responded. There are two separate issues involving the grade. The first issue is the maximum grade for a fire department access road in the Massachusetts amendments. The maximum grade is 10% unless otherwise approved by the AHJ.
Authority having jurisdiction.
There you go. The second issue is the angle of approach in departure for any means of the fire department access road cannot exceed a 1 foot drop in 20 feet, or the design limitation of the fire apparatus of the fire department. Their ladder track is capable of handling a maximum departure or approach of 8%.
Yeah, you're going downhill pretty steep down Barnes Hill at this point, and then you're going to take a sharp left and do a pretty steep upgrade. I mean, or they're going to be coming uphill. Actually, they're going to be coming uphill. But
apologizes for spelling. He was using Siri.
Okay. So
the grades here is relatively level as you get to the bottom of McCombs Pond, and it does start to slope up quicker as you get here, and then I believe it levels out at the top of 150, or it gets shallower at that point. I believe, and I don't quote me, but I believe the maximum grades are around 5 or 6% in this part of the road.
yeah, I hit a good speed on my bike on that hill. Oh yeah.
Oh, going down.
That's a nice hill.
So the approach here is that we're using about a 2% connection or 2 or 3% connection here.
On the entrance.
And then we have a vertical curve, a shorter vertical curve than what was specified. That was one of the waivers we were requesting.
Yeah.
But still, after a certain distance, you would be up to the 8%, or in this case, 10% that we're showing here. And that was the intent. So we still have a vertical curve to allow for a gradual change in slope. And of course, the maximum that we have shown here is 10%.
Right. So if the applicant negotiates with the fire department and they can come to terms, we could change our view on whether or not to grant a waiver later during the definitive subdivision process, right? So, I mean, it seems like to me, the sense I'm getting is that we would probably, at least I'm proposing that we grant all waivers except for the 8% with the thought that there'll be further refinement and that perhaps they can come back later with that. Any different view on that?
I would second that. I think that it creates a smaller impact on the overall lot, especially removing the actual circular cul-de-sac. A lot fewer trees are going to come down.
Actually, if I may add to that, I don't know if this should be a specific waiver, but we're also asking to not have the sidewalk, and I didn't
That
see
is
that.
a specific waiver.
Okay, so that would be included.
Oh, yeah, that's not on the list.
Added to that list.
You can add it.
Okay, we'll add it.
Okay.
I have a newbie question. If each lot's gonna have the minimum frontage and minimum acreage, what's the advantage to having a subdivision versus an A&R and splitting into two lots?
An A&R
Is that a
would,
silly question?
has minimum frontage and area requirements as well. And because of the existing alignment along this portion, we don't have enough frontage to
Oh, I
create
see.
an A&R based on that.
So
We're
the
short by
150
about-
frontage is on this right away.
That's
Got
correct.
it.
It'd be on Barnes Hill Road. So by doing this, we're actually creating the frontage along that road to create enough for the two lots.
Thank you.
And this is where it comes into, how much impact that we're making to the lot there. This is more impact, but it provides all the necessary frontage for two lots.
Mhm.
And it meets the minimum requirements of the area and the frontage, and the access as well.
Thank you.
Okay. I mean, are we ready for a motion, you think? So, anyone want to compose such a motion? Looking in the general direction of the end of the table?
What other motions do we have?
Not nicely written out for us. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Render decision.
Render a decision. I make a motion that we approve the preliminary subdivision plan of, am I referencing the engineer?
Douglas Sears, trustee for N&T
Oh,
Sears Trust, I
okay.
assume.
Yes.
The Douglas Sears, of the N&T Sears Trust, Douglas Sears trustee, subject with the requested waivers, including the requested waiver for the sidewalk, but not with the waiver for the removal, for the non-inclusion of the sidewalk, but not with a waiver for the 10% grade.
Okay.
The only addition I would make is in the town planner's report, there were some recommendations from town staff for additional items with any definitive plan submission.
But would that be part of our motion?
That would be part of your decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we approve it, but yeah, subject to
include
providing additional details as requested by town staff. Okay? Any discussion? Any second on this? Thank you. All in favor? Okay. On to the definitive subdivision.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a little while. And now to our 7:45 p.m. item. The recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals for the application of and so do I tomorrow morning, but application of the Concord Free Public Library for a special permit and site plan review under various sections of the zoning bylaw for partial demolition of an existing house, construction of a new addition, interior renovations, new accessible pedestrian entrance, and site improvements at 129 and 151 Main Street. So, would the applicant care to update us on what's transpired?
Well, I'll start with a brief introduction. I'm Jeff Adams, trustee with the Concord Free Public Library. And I'll introduce briefly our representatives, and then we'll make a very brief presentation about the updated information based upon feedback we received at the last meeting. Tonight we have Stu Roberts and Michael, our project architects from Johnson Roberts Association. Architects Jeff Dirk from Vanessa, who can answer questions on parking. Chris Garcia from GGD, who's our project engineer, will help with any questions. Kim Ahern, who's had a very long evening. Thank you for staying. Our landscape architect, library director Kerry Cronin is also here to answer any questions about operations, and Nate from CE Floyd, our project builder. So thank you. I think Michael will offer a brief introduction.
Sure. Thank you for having us. I'll step over here very quickly. I'll cross over so people can see the board. I know we were before you late July. We've taken those comments that we received then and tried to incorporate them. And I think we've given those in the latest submission that we sent for this project. So I don't want to go through every item necessarily and let you bring what you want to talk about, but we've added a bike rack, made some of those modifications, and we have Jeff Dirk here to discuss park commission. That was one of the big issues that we talked about a month and a half ago.
But in terms of the structure, I couldn't find any differences from what we reviewed in July. And I know that there had been a lot of discussion with the Historic Districts Commission, and I just was curious where those discussions ended up. I haven't really heard back.
Sure. So I was away last week when the Historic District Commission met, but I'll try to summarize. The changes that we made largely had to do with the rear of the building here, which the footprint hasn't changed very much, but some of the fenestration and the details changed, mostly in the elevations, but not a whole lot. So we did receive their approval with conditions that I think are outlined in Elizabeth Hughes' report, but that's the extent of the changes are mostly to do with the fenestration, the facades. I believe the updated elevations are in the package.
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, I looked at them and I really struggled to see what was different.
If we want to go to the elevations, I can quickly summarize the updates.
Sure.
I mean, we obviously don't have the side by side, but I can tell you where
That's
the big
okay.
changes are.
You're right toward the end.
This looks like this might be the previous version, or this looks like an earlier version, actually. Sorry.
Maybe that's why. I'm looking at the 830 version. Yeah.
That's on the screen.
Actually, so that was interesting because I saw the before and now I can see the after.
Yeah. So
you're right. So you've kind of closed up some of the windows that were up here on the upper deck of the right.
Do you want to go before and after?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually, this still looks like.
No, really?
Yeah.
From August 30th?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is. I'm sorry. This is updated. I'm sorry. I thought they were in color. That's why I was confused. But so this is pretty much the same on this facade. The change mostly happened back here. So one thing that's changed that you don't see in the black and white is initially this had all been colored to be stained. Now we're painting it so it'll match the same color as the house. We've added these. It's a little hard to see here, but these are now a colonnade as opposed to just some rafter extensions. And we had as the roof kind of turned here, and that's no longer the case. And this architrave this architrave that's happening here is the same that's happening on the front. Those are the major changes. Another change has to do with refining some of the fenestration on this portion of the building, and evening out this has been more of a salt box shape and evening the pitch there. Those are the major changes that I think have happened since the last time we were before you.
On the, let's see, this is the Sudbury Road side on the right. There used to be sort of glass at the top across there, and isn't that going to affect the interior?
There had been more glass up here.
Yeah.
So we made that smaller. That's above where the periodical stacks are going to be. So we'll still have some windows up there. They'll be smaller, but we're still using that to get light into that space because this is the south. So we also have some skylights that'll help bring some light into that space, as well as the northern facing windows.
Okay, and then what is the status of the Historic Districts Commission review? Are they done? Have they, what are they?
They've approved it with the condition that we go back with our final construction documents, which we need to update to match these changes and get approved. But that was one of the conditions. Is that, am I answering that correctly? Okay, thanks.
That's in it. Yeah, it's in the report. I can. The Historic Districts Commission approved the library application to demolish portions of the building, construct a single-story addition linking the Haywood Benjamin House to the Concord Free Public Library, renovate existing buildings, and make numerous site improvements. There are several conditions of approval, including the review and approval of final construction drawings, site details, architectural details, and the landscaping plan by the HDC prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Okay, yeah, that's not on the list of documents yet on this website, right?
They haven't issued
it.
They haven't issued the certificate of appropriateness.
I see.
That was last Thursday night.
Okay. All right. So there were, let's see, other than, so that was one set of questions. Are we done now, I think, with the architect's review? I think the next set of questions were kind of around, well, I don't know, maybe, well, there's the engineer and the architect. There were questions from the public about the sustainability elements of the design, right? And just energy efficiency, specifically in the types of systems being used for heating and whether they, are all electric. It sounds like you've got some updated information there relative to our last review, so it'd just be nice to get an update on that.
Yeah, I can summarize. This was the summary of our approach to sustainability, which included our application. So one of the things that we're doing to address sustainability is obviously reusing the library, which goes without saying, and another, we're reusing the historic portions of the house in an adaptive reuse. So all the carbon that's embodied in the construction of those buildings is remaining there, and those buildings will continue, in the case of the house, in a new capacity to serve the community for generations to come. Another thing that we're doing to address sustainability is that the addition, the vast majority of the addition is using a heavy timber structure, a glulam structure. And the thought behind that, in addition to it being an aesthetic choice, is that the wood stores carbon as opposed to traditional steel construction, which is very carbon intensive. We are also using entirely electric HVAC systems in the expansion, which will also be included at the house. The existing library building does have, I believe it's a natural gas boiler. We're not touching the systems within the existing library, other than adding a few terminal units, but we're not adding any new fossil fuel equipment. It's all completely electric. Let's do the next. So we also, we've done an energy model. It's a little out of date at this point. It was done last summer. So at the time, the energy model still assumed that there was some natural gas for some of the supplemental heat in areas like the vestibules. That has since been switched to all electric systems. So that energy model shows, I think, let's say, I can't remember the exact number, 5 or 10% that was fossil fuels. That's no longer the case.
Okay.
And that energy model also showed that we were going to perform about 48%. And this is just looking at the library, the addition and the house, not really looking at the part of the library that's not being touched. But we'll be using, I think it was about 48% less energy per square foot than a baseline library project.
What's a baseline library project?
So it's set by, I'm trying to remember which government agency, but it's set by a commercial data set that says, they look at all these libraries across the country that were built, and they look at their energy use. But I believe it's an Energy Star.
So it's sort of backward looking.
Yes.
But I mean, I guess the memo that I saw was quoting a HERS rating of like close to 100.
So
And so that doesn't sound very, I mean, that's numbers that we've been
Yes.
working with, right? So that just doesn't seem very efficient.
So I can tell you, so our predicted EUI, which is the energy use intensity, per square, so how many kBTUs you're using per square foot in a year, is 81.1, and according to the to that data set, the baseline is 156 for library. So the model at the time, I think, had 97. Since tweaked that so we think it's 81. And that I think is still from before we had entirely electric. So that may be tweaked, but the big issue with the reason why that number is as high as it is largely because we are attaching, we're building an addition to two historic but leaky structures. So we can make the envelope of the addition completely tight, but because we're tying into two existing buildings that we're not planning to, strip all the cladding off of and make put air barriers and all the stuff that we would do if we were building them from scratch now, the heat or the cooling that we're putting into the addition is going to go into those spaces and leak out. So that's a big reason why that makes it more difficult on an addition and a renovation project, especially where we're not touching most of the library, to get that, to be closer to like a net zero or something. But the intention is by using all electric at the library, as the energy grid becomes more.
Oh yeah, well that's a given.
Yeah, so
but I guess the question that wasn't clear to me was the addition itself and the way it's being constructed, even with the constraints of being attached to the existing structures. Is it as efficiently designed as possible? That's I guess the question that had been raised.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we looked at in the energy model, we looked at the construction typology that we're using now for the exterior walls, and then we looked at doing one that had an even more robust insulation.
Right.
And I could dig around in this and let you know, but the difference was almost completely negligible because so much of the conditioned air that we're putting into the building is going to migrate into spaces that we're not touching and will leak out through the building there. So if we were doing just the addition as a standalone building, we could make the envelope even more robust and it would,
Of course.
Yeah, but if we made it more robust, according to this energy model, it's not going to do very much at all.
Question. So the addition is 6,500 square feet.
Net, yeah. Once you
Is that included the house?
No.
Okay.
So that's
that's net. That's subtracting what they're tearing down.
Okay.
So gross. What's the gross area of the addition?
Let me see.
Well, I'm just trying to compare it to the house.
Right.
House
It's
would
like,
be
what is it, like 8,000 square feet? That's a rough guess, but
Yeah, I think
the gross size of the addition. So it'd be
And-
probably double the size of the house.
So is there going to be weatherization improvements to the house also?
There's not in the areas that we're not touching the exterior. So, but Jeff Adams.
So, for example, we're preserving as much as we can of the Hayward Benjamin house built in the 1790s. We're not replacing the windows.
Mhm.
We're not replacing the foundation that a modern structure would have, foundation insulation. We're preserving the exterior of the house. Fortunately, the previous owners did a great deal of renovation. In fact, for all intents and purposes, they completely gutted it and have added a fair amount of insulation to the existing structure that has, in most parts, an air infiltration barrier on the outside, shredded blue jean insulation in the walls.
Do you know how long ago that was?
20 years ago.
Right. So
During the
most of that
early
insulation
2000s.
settles, and I guess I'm curious to know, if your concern is that you're building this nice efficient part, but it's going to leak out the sides, this would be the time to address the weatherization of the larger building through air sealing and insulation and blown
So
insulation.
some of that's been done. And,
20 years ago.
20 years
But I'm
ago.
saying like it settles in the wall. So if you did an energy audit of it now, I'm sure it would find a significant amount of gaps.
Mhm.
What's
As you would in any older home. In our
absolutely.
situation, it would also entail for an ideal project to focus solely on energy efficiency and not the issues and opportunities expressed by the HDC. It would be replacing all of the single pane windows in the house, for example.
I don't think that's actually the case. I think that's not proven to be a cost-effective and energy-saving measure compared to other measures that you can do. So I mean, I would never go straight to windows, but I would go to air sealing and insulation and not just say.
Which I just did in my house. Yeah.
Right, and not just say it was done.
Yeah.
Well, 20 years ago is.
Yeah,
But anyway,
but
I guess I'm curious. Like that would be my recommendation, and I think that I would want something to.
And it would be a modest cost relative to the overall
savings.
project expense, and
Most
yeah.
definitely in terms of what would pay for itself in energy savings over time.
So one issue though is, we're talking about just the library. We also have just the house. We also have the library, which is probably equally leaky because it's never been insulated. Except for recent additions. So, if we're going to end up pushing the air is going to migrate. Like thermodynamics.
I guess my point is, I think there should be some sort of energy audit of the entire, what you're proposing, whether it's the HERS rating or something, to say. Because obviously you need to make sure that the ventilation is appropriate and when you're sealing things and so on and so on. And so saying, well, just because air is going to leak out, I'm not confident that we're really talking to the right people in terms of sustainability. So that makes me a little concerned in terms of really bringing, Concord's vision of, and that's the centerpiece of the
town
infrastructure.
infrastructure.
Of the town, to just say, well, it's going to leak anyway. I think we can do better for sure. And I think, you will save money over time, which is clearly important. This is a town building. This is a building you have to continue to get funded. And you mentioned the solar ready roof. Yeah. What's the rough square footage of that?
I don't have it on the top of my head, but it's relatively small because we don't have a lot of sloped roof. And in the historic district where our belief was that we would not get approval for
Right.
solar.
And that's fine.
And
I was
we're an
just
all
curious.
electric, green electric, so.
Right. I mean, exactly. Yeah. So.
It's okay, I think.
It's probably 200 square feet, somewhere.
Right,
It's small.
Yeah. Okay. So negligible.
You raised some good points, and to that point, we've been recently had a conversation with Brad Hubbard Nelson, Charlie Parker, and Michael McAteer, and we've invited them to participate and sit down with the engineers and engage in those conversations. So we are pursuing that.
Oh, that's great. I think that it's a success story waiting to happen, and we just don't want to miss out on opportunities of.
Okay.
Great.
So I think now we are actually done with the architecture questions.
Oh, darn,
I think
sorry.
Well, perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah.
So the next line of discussion that we had in the last meeting was around parking and parking requirements. And I think that, one of the open questions was in particular because of the provision of additional town staff and the different kind of load on parking that town staff do versus patrons. Is there any way to provide some sort of parking? I don't know how, but people have been creative in the past and have found ways to do it. Again, because parking is a major concern in the town center. And
Are you talking about parking during construction or post?
No, post.
Okay, just make sure.
Oh, that was another whole discussion topic, but yeah.
So so for this project represents the addition of approximately 2.5 staff people.
Right.
And that's not 2.5 staff people from 9 to 5. That's 2.5 staff people covered over 69 hours over a 7-day period of time. So it's
I thought it was net one staff from a point of view.
No, I think it's 2.5
2.5,
roughly.
okay.
But and additionally, as far as the the applicant has come up with as far as adding the two handicap parking spaces on Main Street, working with the town to relocate an existing handicap space that's in front of 100 Main Street, which goes nowhere. As far as it's relocating that, opening up that space for actual, just as a regular parking space. So there's a net increase.
So if you're creating an additional
one
park-
additional parking space, net increase of one space.
Okay.
On Main
Well,
Street.
that's kind of the thing I was looking for. I mean, that's basically what I was looking for, something like
So
that.
that was added into the planning board's criteria for evaluating requests for relief from parking.
Right.
That's item, and the numbering is completely off, which would be item 3, which should be item 4, but it's on page 5 of the report.
Okay.
What is the intensity of the use and the number of employees required?
Okay. And then, yeah, so that addition of the net one spot is in the report. Good. Any other questions on the parking
Well, just related,
elements?
I recall, and I apologize if I'm actually crossing wires with another project, but an input from a member of the public talking about changing sort of the focus of, I'm trying to remember if it was a book drop off or the
It was this project, and they were talking about possibly flipping the handicapped over to Sudbury Road. And I guess you've investigated that, and it didn't prove to be feasible.
Sure.
Or?
So we included a diagram showing it in both locations. Put my notes on that. So. And the.
Which one is it?
It should be. The one. It might be that one. Yes, it's this one. So the next, I can summarize this, but this is the diagram. So we did it we measured from the midpoint of the parking spaces to the exterior, the door to the interior of the building that would be closest, rather than to any specific point in the building, because in talking to the library, patrons come in and don't necessarily go to the circulation desk. They could be going to any number of places within the library. So we wanted to measure it to the front door. So when people are coming, if it's bad weather or anything else, that when are you inside the building? We looked at it here where we proposed on Main Street, as well as up here on Sudbury Road. It was, let's see if I can read the numbers here. Coming from Main Street, it was 85 feet from the midpoint of the parking spaces to the door, and from Sudbury Road it was 154 feet from the midpoint of parking spaces to the door. There were several other benefits that we noted about locating the parking spaces here. One is that there's already parking on Main Street, so we're able to use that parking as a bit of a buffer for this bump out, so we can get parking in an aisle and have it be a little more protected.
But maneuvering around the parked cars to get into that bump out seems like it could be a challenge.
Sure. So I'll let Chris Garcia, our civil engineer, speak to that a little bit more. But we've worked out. So this is, and one thing we're looking at with the town the town engineer is whether this aisle is on the inside or outside. But we can talk about that a bit too. But
yeah, that would make more sense, I think.
Yeah, well, our thought was on this side, if you're getting out as a driver, there's a little more protection, but we can do it either way. It's the same depth, so it's just a matter of where the striping is. The other another benefit to locating it here is we do have there is some accessible parking in the Stowe Street lot, so this provides parking for 2 entrances as opposed to just one.
And they also usually have a truck, coming in there every day. I don't know.
Dropping books.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another.
That would be hard to.
Logistically, for the library van that pulls over here in the drop-off space, which we'll have to do now because we had initially a spot for the van here, which we eliminated in our some of the modifications we made in response to the HCC comments. The van will still use this spot. And the van, unlike patrons who might be going to all different places in the library, is really coming to the circulation desk. Another issue is because of the buffer that the parking provides here, we're able to not have to come in quite as far into the site here. Coming in over here, we'd have to come in another, I want to say 8 to 12 feet, which would disrupt a lot of the landscaping here. And there are two big factors that I think might preclude it from being in this location, which include between the property line here and the existing crosswalk. We're really tight to, I don't think we'd actually be able to get the spaces in here and get the cutouts that we really need to get a car to maneuver in there. And the other is that the fire department has said that they would much prefer to see the parking spaces on Main Street, because in the event of an emergency, they would use this area to respond to the building. So for all those reasons, we looked at it. It was certainly a worthwhile exercise to look into, but we ended up leaving them here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What else do we need to look at? Other comments from the board? Questions?
What are we done to? It's a site plan review, and what else?
Well, relief from parking.
Relief from parking.
And we're recommending the special permit, whether it should be granted.
So the additional parking relief, so you're just trying, on the numbers, the existing library gets 168 as already grandfathered in, right?
Right.
So the addition of this adds, is it correct that it adds a need for an additional 64 spaces? Is that what we're providing relief on?
That's
what I'm reading.
I believe so.
So, because, is there any data that shows because it's a larger building, there will be more vehicles?
So if I could turn it over to Jeffrey Dirk Vermenes, who did our parking analysis. I'm sure he'll be able to answer any of these questions much more eloquently than I can.
Not necessarily.
Okay. I'll hand this over.
Sure, no, that's okay. So for the record, my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm partner with Vanessa & Associates. So just in looking at the parking numbers, and you can translate that into traffic. So the way we're approaching it is similar to the way that you're trying to make the finding relative to the relief that's required, which is theoretically, if we just looked at your zoning and the numbers you cited were correct, the existing library has a demand for parking of 168 vehicles. So you could say that's kind of the peak demand and peak number of vehicles that will be required. As they expand the building, that number goes to 232. So theoretically, there's an increase of 64 additional vehicles. So during the peak parking demand period, there's 64 additional cars coming that need to have a place to park so the patrons can visit the library. So the parking demand analysis and parking study that we undertook was to demonstrate that within a reasonable walking distance of the site, which is defined as approximately 5 minutes, that there's at least 64 available parking spaces, and that was the purpose of the study. And so it basically demonstrated that if you looked at parking over a continuous 12-hour period in this area within a 5-minute walking distance, the peak parking demand occurs at about 1:00 p.m. actually on a weekday and a Saturday. And during that time period, there's in excess of 240 available parking spaces within walking distance of the site. So that's how we arrived. And so it's a long way of answering your question. If theoretically there's 64 additional vehicles that will be generated as a result of the addition that need to have parking somewhere in the area.
I think that's fine. I'm not going to belabor this, but I don't think just because the building is larger that more people are going to come. I mean, I hope they do, but
Yeah.
I just the way that our thing is written
Correct.
specifies
And I
square
completely agree
footage.
with you. Yeah, and I mean, there's also, it may not go up that much. You also have people that live in the area that will walk over, so it doesn't take into account all of that, but just in looking at your zoning, realistically, you're right. There's not gonna be that much of an increased demand. But based on the findings, you need to make, theoretically, there's 64 additional vehicles that need to park.
I mean, there will be more event spaces and
That's
programming.
it.
Yeah.
But that could be in off hours or something.
Yeah, but the immediate parking conflicts, I mean, that brings us to the MOU. I mean, has there been any further discussions with the umbrella and is that?
Paused a little bit with the new town manager coming in.
Yeah.
That was taken kind of as far as it could, and then it's pending review now that he's on board.
Okay.
I mean, I hope so. I'm
I
sure
feel
that's
very
part of the
fortunate.
reason is to make
We're
it.
just considering the parking crash caused by our town library.
I know. I mean, that's a good thing. You want more people there.
I would say on the parking, I don't have any concerns with that, but on that the MOU, that's the wild card, is that new building with big events coming online over at
Umbrella.
Emerson Umbrella.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that will soak up all the parking when they're having in that immediate vicinity when they're having a big event, and to have coordination between the library and the Umbrella on having large events, I think would be really critical, because I think what you'll find is the parking works and works and works, and then when you get 5% over capacity, it'll be a mess and get a lot of complaints.
That's well said, and that's the nature of the MOU. In fact, that collaboration's already been taking place, and the details of the MOU are to codify it with an electronic calendar. But there's already been very good collaboration between Concord Academy, the library, and the Umbrella to avoid head-to-head conflicts. In fact, no conflict has been cited with events that have occurred in the same evening because of that current communication. It'll be detailed in a little more effort. There's also a renovation that's planned at the Umbrella parking lot, which is actually a municipal parking lot.
Right.
And there's discussion, we actually approved that at town meeting a year and a half ago. That project's been delayed a little bit, but there's conversation about, with engineering, about the potential of 20 more spaces in that lot. So we're hoping that will happen soon.
Yeah.
Okay, should we move from parking to, I think there are two sets of comments that came last time. I'm looking at their site plan review, this E, the adequacy of external lighting, and for protection of neighboring properties. I think there were comments about, first of all, the bleed out of light, and then also a window that overlooked another property, and I just didn't know, I mean, I heard that there was something about the more intense shading that's going to be provided, as well as doing that at dusk as opposed to, yeah. So there's that, and then I didn't know if there anything had been done about that overstory window or.
I'll have to turn over to the library about that window.
Sure, can you, so there's an existing window on the west side of the existing library.
Okay, so it's an existing condition.
That a neighbor requested we add shades to. We've added shades that have the capacity to be tied into a timer. And the town is working to improve the Wi-Fi connection in that part of the library. Because right now it won't work with the potential, but Carrie can address it if more information is needed, but the town's on it.
Okay. Then there was the question of the relationship of the structures and open spaces to the natural landscape, existing buildings, and other community assets. So I guess it was really about speaking to the landscaping plan, and basically buffering and all of that. I think there had been a couple comments on that, but I didn't know if there had been any updates to the landscaping plan.
Let's see, we changed, where's the plan? Do you have the section?
Should be in the 830 drawings.
I could just talk about it if you don't have it.
This one?
This is older, I think. Sorry, it should be the ones that are dated. I think they're dated 830.
While we're searching for that, Kim will comment. I think we're looking for the color plan on the change with the lack of parking on property, and then an operating premise that, particularly on the west side of the property, Kim's design incorporates some additional plantings with the intention of working with the neighbors to plant those in a way that will be most effective to achieve screening.
That's about it.
That's
I'm sorry, west side. That's this
That's
line.
that line on the right.
At the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What about there's a new bike rack somewhere? Where's
Sorry.
They're the same-
Right here.
right there on the
And
street?
it'd be the
Okay.
same style that's used on the Sudbury Road side.
Okay.
And I think we had 5 on this one, is
That's
that
what
right?
it
Looks like on there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the board wants fewer than that, but that, we took a stab at 5.
I would not do fewer.
Not fewer.
Not fewer, okay.
Yeah.
We're really excited about these changes. I don't know if you've seen the elevation from Main Street. This is actually a result of community input, and particularly from the HDC, where we initially had the accessible parking spaces on library property. And having those spaces was very important to the corporation to make the library as accessible as possible. The HDC objected to paving on the property, and we didn't know what to do, but came up with an alternative that allows for these 2 spaces on Main Street, which created a wonderful garden opportunity that Kim's detailed in front of that entrance. And also an ability to plant some more trees to set it back and make it a little less visible from Main Street. You might, Elizabeth, if it's easy, just bring up that elevation. Is that from the Main Street elevation? Is that on the submittal?
Or the rendering?
Yeah.
Michael's the rendering?
Oh, no, the rendering's not in here.
Okay,
I
we
have-
don't worry about it, sorry.
They're the same renderings that we had for the HDC. I don't know if it's
No, that's
possible to
okay.
pull those up, or I have a thumb drive, but
That's
no,
okay, thank you.
Okay.
I can
They're just
see if they're still online.
Okay. Yeah. They would have been, they would have been the latest HTC, or I have a thumb drive if that's easier. But,
In those landscape plans, there's one really big tree right in front of the old building.
Right, Yellowwood.
Is it Yellowwood?
Mhm.
That's staying?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, we're gonna protect that.
Okay.
and one thing I think I mentioned last time with Kim was away, but the thought with that garden out front is that it will tie in and be in the same language as the garden that's on the Sudbury Road side.
You could scroll down to the 3rd one.
We didn't get to see these.
I know.
I
It's
tell
nice
you,
to see.
That's it.
we don't count.
Sorry.
Wow.
And the oval or circle would be bluestone, similar to the Sudbury Road
I
garden.
have to say that does look more Concordian than the previous.
So, I mean, so right now that's 2 driveways
Yes.
Correct.
that run down there, 2 stone dust driveways.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, as part of the landscaping plan, we need to adhere to the tree bylaw. So this, we're working on that effort as well to protect the perimeter trees.
Residential? Huh? Interesting. Residential zoning, okay. Then if we're done with this, the last 2 criteria, one is just impact on town resources. I haven't heard anything special about that. And then the last one was sustainability and resiliency, which we've already discussed this evening. So I think that takes us through all of the site plan review criteria. And I would say now would be a moment we could open up for public comment, if there is public comment. Yes, state your name and your address.
Ed Nardi, 29 Academy Lane.
Okay.
I think the first thing I'd like to touch on is the sustainability. I appreciate you bringing that up tonight. I too share the non-understanding about the, achieving a 48% betterment across the United States library sampling, if you will. It seems abstract and arbitrary, and I agree with one of the commissioner's statement tonight. It really is backwards looking and not forwards looking. I think one of the challenges they have is there's a large amount of glass on the addition. So I don't think they would achieve as long as they say they will if that was done in a vacuum because of the degree of glass not only on the sidewalls but on the roof. A lot of solar gain, especially on the south facing side. And in fact, if the Haywood Benjamin house and the former owners had effectively renovated the house, I'm not sure why under the new project, they don't go in and gut renovate where those all those walls were taken apart, I assume you're gonna rewire the house to be more library capable. You're not gonna use the existing wiring here, I would assume, I could be wrong. But you have the ability to go in there and, you know, sustainability is all about the envelope. That's where it all starts, that's where it all stops. I don't understand why that can't be a much more holistic approach to the Hayward Benjamin house. So you don't have a leaky arm on one side, the body of the addition, and then the old library on the other side. I read, and it could be a draft letter that was sent to the board, but I know some of the sustainable folks in town had questioned the, why this is at approximately an 81% rating, whereas I assume although new, the middle school project is close to a 19 and a currently refurbished project in the town of Lincoln is a 23, which is a school project. It seems like there's a very significant difference of 81 to 19 to 23. And in today's world, I don't understand why that can't be significantly more pushed. And certainly sticking to, you know, I understand that it's a more significant cost at the front end to do those things, but in the end, in the long-term solution, and in consideration of the town paying the operating expenses, it seems like penny wise and pound foolish in the long run. So I do appreciate the library coming together with this sustainability committee to further that review and hopefully better those metrics. Then I just wanted to, again, I was here last time and didn't quite understand the conditions and how those would be imposed in special permit. There was a great deal of talk, and I think the chair did touch on a number of those issues, but it's in the specifics and the details, not necessarily the generalities on how those conditions will work. And I don't know how that ties to an issuance of a special permit. And by that I mean, we left the HDC meeting with a condition, a primary condition, that I wanted to see the contract documents, the construction documents, just to confirm that everything's in accordance with what was, I assume, represented, and just making sure all the details are correct. But if that review goes on for, plans aren't done yet, they've got to review them, it might be 60 days from now. If a special permit is granted without their review and those conditions coming back from the HDC to inform you, how do you put those conditions, attach those conditions to the special permit without that review being completed?
Okay. Well, just to see if we can get all the public comment first before we conclude.
And I'll just very quickly touch on the conditions, and I think you spoke about a fair amount of those, but it's just a matter of understanding those a little bit more specifically. One is the landscaping. We appreciate some of the buffering aspects of it, but wanted to understand if the library is also proposing to maintain and replace, when the landscaping, should it fail, will they replace the same in kind, in perpetuity? Same with the lighting. It's been represented that the lighting on the south and west side of the building will only be driven by building code requirements. There would be no other lighting back there. And again, wanted to be clear that that is a condition in perpetuity. Programming. It's been represented that there will be no evening programming on the south and west side of the property. West side, I don't think there's any real ability to do anything there. It's a access point, but nonetheless, just for clarification's sake. And wanted to understand what that means by way of hours, to 5:30 at night, after 5:30 at night, you know, to 8 a.m. the next morning. There'll be no programming, Monday through Sunday, holidays. So that's a question that the neighborhood has. We have as the butters. And then on the weekends, wanted to understand the extent of programming, if any, during the day hours. That was not talked about at the HDC. Shades. Over the last course of the meetings at the HDC, we the applicant offered a 97% opacity shade. I'm not sure at that degree why it isn't a blackout shade, so now it's kind of, if you will, black and white. There's light coming out. There shouldn't be. If there's a little bit of light, at 97%, it's a very little bit of light. But again, most of the shades that I've seen along those regards, because the 97% opacity is typically driven from exterior light coming into the interior, not necessarily measuring interior light exiting through the shade. So trying to understand the specification and the details of that so we don't have light bleed around the edges, and the commentary is we provided 97% opacity shades, but do they really work by way of the intended perspective of shielding the neighborhood from the light, not the light coming into the building? So trying to understand that condition and the specifications of that. And then lastly, regarding just construction scheduling, just wanted to understand when construction starts in the morning. I believe it's 7 a.m., but again, just wanted to confirm. And requesting that there be no weekend work, given its proximity to the neighborhood.
I think that it would be useful for you to just document these desired conditions.
I'm happy to do so, but again, I'm just trying to understand how these conditions attach themselves by way of timing on the issuance of permits.
That's it exactly, actually. Thank you, Ned. That was well summarized. Many of these things have been discussed and are identified in the historic district commissions. And as you just suggested, the way those are enforced is that a building permit can't be obtained until the conditions are met.
Right. I just think the nature of those conditions are typically not the kind of conditions that we're reviewing in the site plan review. I mean, and so I don't know if we're the body for all of those. You know, some of those, yes, but basically with the physical aspects of the site, with regards to the operations, less so.
So who may be that the body or the regulatory body that issues those conditions?
Huh? Yeah, okay, well, the building commissioner then is what Nancy said.
I just wanted to share, Elizabeth, there's a plumbing issue.
Yeah.
That's why she left. And
Oh,
so she's-
no.
Okay, and normally she would be
Yeah.
helping us out with some of the
Yeah, so I
technicalities in
apologize.
terms of what the boundaries of our authority are, but I could just say many of the things that you're bringing up are, you know, we're doing a site plan review, so we're trying to decide, okay, I mean, I just went through the criteria.
Yes.
Is the parking adequate? You know, is there provision for shading? But the operation of it, you know, is more of a question of, you know, procedures that I don't know that we're weighing in on in our capacity.
If I could have, the town has a construction bylaw that's
That
part of the
has all
town
these
bylaw
rules.
That spells out a lot of the concerns, and it's online and that can.
And then like in the maintenance of the landscaping, there are rules about how, you know, how long these have to be warranted to work. So, you know, there are basic conditions that are established for all of the kind of work that's done on the site and the changes that are going to happen. But there may be limits to what the conditions will state versus what you were asking for, I think, in some cases.
Well, I guess I could honestly say that's very concerning to me, because I don't see how the building commissioner, if he's not at these meetings, right, you know, obviously he's not, he's got a job to do. How is he aware of any of these conditions if they're not in the special permit? How does he know shades are required at this type,
Nancy
this
has that.
specification, etc.? I don't understand how they're brought forward and then enforced if a regulatory body is not taking those and providing them as specific conditions for the special permit.
This did come up at the HDC meeting.
Yeah.
Most of these are conditions that have been discussed at the meeting and will be part of the final approval. Ed has asked one or two other questions that haven't come up, such as weekend activities. And a number of, all of the questions I think you just identified need to be answered. And will commit to making part of that the HDC review, since shades and activities and all of those things have come up over the more than 6 months discussions.
Well, and in fact,
and they're articulated in their conditions.
And the
That's
HDC
body.
tends to be more restrictive in regards to, the impact on the streetscape even than we are.
I think it's a different board
It's a
that
different-
needs to address
right.
most of those questions.
Exactly.
And Jeffrey, you say that, excuse me, if you don't mind me asking.
Got
I believe that's
it
the-
addressed to me.
Yes, so based on that, I assume it's the HDC that would provide those conditions in their certificate of appropriateness?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. For the majority of them, there are still some of those that you touched upon that are within our purview, but and that's why I think just having a comprehensive list would just, because as a member of the public, you don't have to be able to ferret out all this stuff, but the town
I
does.
appreciate that. I guess again, a lingering concern. I believe the HDC there are no more public meetings coming out of the HDC. I think that was closed. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know where Elizabeth is, but she would be answering
She
this
would
question.
be.
Yes.
So I apologize, other
But
than the
the
emergency.
And there's some pretty
HDC
technical
has asked
topics
to
here.
see the final construction plans, and they will review those at another meeting.
Okay, so there will be another.
Right.
Okay,
They've approved the project,
Yes.
but they've requested as their order of conditions to review the plans, and they will be discussing those maybe at the October 17th meeting.
Okay.
But we don't, that's not.
Okay, I think I need to move on to other questions for the public. Yes.
Hi, Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street.
Okay.
I thought Nancy was jumping up and down to say that at the zoning board of appeals.
Well, the zoning board
the
appeals.
The building commissioners actually sits there. So Mr. Nardi, you'll be able to have a chance to talk with the building commissioner at
Thank
the
you.
zoning board of appeals.
Thank you.
I guess I've been around too long to know how some of these things work.
They usually show up anyway. Yeah.
No, he does show up. I submitted a letter yesterday supporting Brad Hubbard Nelson, Charlie Parker, and Michael McAteer's letter, and I had a date wrong in it, so I'm going to submit a corrected letter.
Okay.
I referred to a letter of September 5, and it should have been their letter of September 9.
Okay.
They submitted their letter yesterday.
Okay.
And I think the process works here in Concord, and the HDC has done an amazing job. Could you go back to the north from Main
Facade.
Street shot?
The elevation.
The elevation
okay.
from Main Street. People were saying that looks much more like Concord than originally, and I think the HDC has done a great job of getting
Well, the next one.
the library van off of the driveway over there and the.
This one or the next one?
That's all right.
Okay.
I think what is deceiving us a little bit is that nice apple tree or whatever that they are showing there. This connector is still going to be a real eyesore for people coming to Concord and looking for historic Concord. The Library Corporation and the architect just has been a little tone deaf on that. I was chairman of the library committee when we put that children's wing on with the archives in the basement. And we worked very closely with the corporation. I went to all the construction meetings and we made sure that it blended with the town. This connector really doesn't, but the HDC has done their best to try and get small steps. I wasn't surprised that when you looked at the plans this time around from the last time around, that you didn't find many changes, because there haven't been many changes, other than the grass area. As far as energy efficiency goes, thank you very much for raising those and focusing on that. I do think the Library Corporation has been particularly tone deaf on this issue. I was very interested to hear, I guess it was Michael up here today, talking about the leakiness of the old house, because I had offered the Library Corporation funding to, I have tightened up 2 houses in New Hampshire, not in Maine, but New Hampshire, that's been misstated. using modern technology, all the testing outside and seeing where the leaks are and seeing where it's settled. I offered to donate funds for the house, and that was turned back because they don't think they need to do that. That's all well and good, that's it. But I would encourage you to at least try and get the results of the meeting between, and I after the town meeting in April, I was able to get a meeting with Mr. Adams and Brad Hubbard, Nelson, and myself, and I thought there would be a dialogue back and forth, but there hasn't been. But now I'm understanding there will be a meeting, so that is helpful. But I think the energy efficiency of this building really needs. Concord is leading us, and this building is in the center of our and the corporation. As I said in my letter, I've always held the corporation to be a leader in our community, and I just don't see them leading in this whole energy efficiency. The question came up about the solar roof and how big it was. There was actually a solar feasibility assessment done for the corporation and for the town library committee and the town, therefore, by Solar Design Associates on September. It was this report was issued on September 1, 2017, and it has the possibility that it has 4 different capacities. One of the costs is around $90,000, and in the scope of the cost of this whole project, I would have thought that the library might have been able to finance some of this to make it a greener project. This is going to be very hard to see, but again, thinking of HDC for Main Street, they were proposing panels on the main library's flat roof, the entrance on the Sudbury side, and the south side of the wing that was put on when I was chairman many years ago, and it would not be seen from the HDC. So there, I would encourage you to ask for this study, and I'm sure that it can be provided to you, and just see if the corporation can't perhaps get some solar, make this a greener project. But my letter supports that initiative. What I really wanted to talk about was the parking variance. You may recall I sat through your discussion with the ZBA board this summer, and I actually thought that there's a little bit of scoffing about parking in town and why we should be looking at variances. People know that I've been involved with the town for a while, and more people are asking me about parking and the issues of parking in town. To get to the bank, you have to park up on Main Street and walk down. We actually moved from Throw Street because parking was getting so full there, a little bit 7/10 of a mile east of the flagpole instead of to the west. And the parking is a whole lot better by Sleepy Hollow than it is by over in Throw Street. But the parking, if you're looking for 730 spaces within a 5-minute walk, that must include over at Crosby's. And I go to a gym hunt class, and the parking lot there is it's from 8 to 9 in the morning. The parking lot's full by 9. The parking lot between the library and the Emerson Umbrella is usually full. You can't park anymore behind the old fire station. Some of you probably know that there was a fire station downtown. The parking is an issue, and I just don't think you should be granting variances. This has 1 additional parking space for the 64 additional requirements. When they have a conference room in here that is going to have seat 400 people for an event. If you have 2.4 people per car, that's a lot for that event, plus everybody else who's using the library. So please look at 7.7.2.12 and see whether this project should be really granted a variance for parking. It's gonna mess up the neighborhood on Academy Lane and Middle Street. I don't think the merchants really want library parkers to come down on the mill dam. So I don't think we should be scoffing at these parking bylaws. And I think they should be taken seriously and not just waivers. Granted, you got a letter from Dory Bean. Could we go to, and this will be my last, could we go to the site plan with the handicap parking on both sides? If that's what the site plan is called.
I don't think it's in here. I think it's
I think it was.
there we go. It was in that file. Yeah.
There was a statement that the distance from Main Street to the doorway was a certain 74 feet, and the distance from Sudbury Road to the doorway.
Yeah, I don't know which file had that particular illustration. It was,
Which one do you want?
they had one that was illustrating comparing
Had the
the.
red lines coming in.
Yeah, I don't.
And the.
But I mean, I think I can recall. Yeah.
So that, the Sudbury Road distance included the ramp that
Yeah.
goes up, which is probably 50 feet, and that's why it's so much longer. That space is actually much shorter, and Dory Bean's letter that you received suggested that you consider that. I don't think the fire department really understands the use of that pull-off on Sudbury Road. If they really think that they're gonna use that to get in on an emergency basis, there are cars parked there dropping off books. The library van uses that to pick up books. The interlibrary Minuteman Library Exchange truck is out there offloading
There we are.
offloading books a lot of the time. So if the emergency vehicles, if the fire department and the police department think they're coming in and using that parking space, I really think someone should study that. Maybe Jeffrey could take a quick look at how much that space is used. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I appreciate the time that you're looking at these, and I really think that the parking issue is one we need to take on as a town, and this is just exacerbating it. Thank you very much.
Other comments from the public? Yes.
Good evening, my name is Sally Sanford and I live at 25 Academy Lane and I'm in a butter to this project. And we talked last time I was the person who presented the idea of thinking about switching the
Right.
accessible parking. And I just want to say a couple of things about that. Before I launch into that, if you leave this up, one point that you raised, I believed, at the last planning hearing, that I don't know if it's technically on your checklist, but you had voiced some concerns about the kitchen and the sanitation and the trash. And you haven't addressed that tonight. I'm just reminding you that that was something you had raised as a concern last time. So I want to go back to the handicap parking. Mr. Adams said that the HDC objected to paving, and they objected to paving facing Main Street. They never considered the possibility of this is a 3-car pull-out here. They never considered the possibility, or they never, because the library didn't propose it, of looking at a small parking lot here, which would make the great, perfect, thank you. They never looked at the possibility of putting the small parking lot with 2 handicap spaces here, which would be very close to the ramp and have the shortest accessible distance. And this idea came up because I went to the Disability Commission's meeting on September 5th. They invited me to make a presentation about accessibility in this project. And they did not take a vote on September 5th, last Thursday, because they didn't think the HDC was going to approve the plan that evening, which they did. And I would just really like to urge you to, they wanted a little more time to kind of step back and see what other things might be able to come up, what other better solutions might be there to help, because a number of people, not just Dory Bean, drive over to Fowler
to return books or to take them, to check them out or return them because it's such a long walk and it's so hard to find parking now. I'm concerned if you leave the handicapped parking here. I produce concerts at the library on Saturday evenings in the wintertime, and we only use the Sudbury Road entrance for security reasons. There's not a lot of people on. So with no handicapped parking over here, if you're a disabled person, you've got to walk all the way around, and it's going to be very, very stressful for those kinds of events where just the Sudbury Road is. So I really would love to have a chance for the Disability Commission to put their heads together with the library and see if there's another alternative that could be acceptable to the HDC. They were objecting over here because of the Main Street streetscape and the historic houses. They never had a chance to opine about a small parking lot here, which is right opposite another parking lot. And had the impact on the streetscape would be very different. As I said, this wasn't my idea, but someone on the commission came up with that idea on Thursday, and I think it merits some exploration. I think that if the really stated goal of the library is to really improve the accessibility for everyone, I don't think we've got the best possible solution here. We may legally, technically have it, but I don't think we're hitting the spirit of really, truly trying to make this library easily accessible for everyone. So I would just very much urge you to consider that. I've written essentially the essence of what I've said here, which I can submit to you. And I don't know if you have read Mrs. Bean's letter into the record, but have you all seen her letter?
I don't know that it was distributed to the board.
Then I'd be very happy to read her letter if I might then.
Wow, it's a whole page though, isn't
It's
it?
a one-page letter.
I think
on
if you,
Why don't we
I think
can
if you
just
send it
submit-
in,
it'll
then
be-
yeah.
it'll be
We get a
circulated.
copy
It
of
was
it.
dropped off to you
I can
the other
scan
day,
this
but if
and-
you would submit that, because Mrs. Bean
Thank you.
was the person who spearheaded Access 51 for 51 Walden and raised $500,000 to improve the accessibility of 51 Walden. She herself is quite mobility impaired and drives over to Fowler. She's an avid reader and has been for decades. She's a very heavy library patron, and she drives over to Fowler because she can't park. She doesn't have an easy place to park and then walk. The real problem is not getting in the door. She lives at 21 Academy Lane, so she's around the corner from.
Okay.
And then it turned out when I mentioned that she was going to write a letter like this, and that she had these issues, it turned out that many people that are members of the Disability Commission themselves or their spouses do the same thing. They drive over to Fowler because there's a handicap space there that has a short walk. So while legally it's the distance to the exterior door, interiorly, if you want to go to the forum or something like that, it's the same long walk to get to the circulation desk. A child who's going in from this way, a disabled child would usually have an able-bodied assistant to help get them to the children's library. That's not true for a mobility impaired driver. And the Disability Commission members were concerned about the safety with the extra traffic coming here on Main Street as opposed to less traffic over here. I think in the case of a fire department emergency, I met with the Assistant Fire Chief, Walter Latta, about this issue. They would close the street off if they needed to. I don't think they'd be using that pullout for an emergency vehicle. They would simply have the street closed off for their vehicles. So I think there's a solution for the EMTs there that doesn't have to impact that. At the very least, if the parking stays here, then please be considerate of your mobility impaired people who are trying to return a book and put a book drop there. Michael said at the HDC hearing that they didn't want to do the flip because it was going to be such a much longer walk for their staff to get to the circulation desk and for people dropping off books, and they didn't want to have people who were trying to do a quick drop over here have a long walk to drop off a book. Well, the simple solution for that is to put a book drop off there. I also have concerns about the fact that this is on the north side of the building. I realize this doesn't come under the purview of the ADA law. This is, again, not the letter of the law, but the spirit of trying to make this easy for disabled people. And the members of the Disability Commission were quite concerned about the fact that this is on the north side. It will be very shaded in bad winter weather, and they're going to slip. Their crutches, their canes, their walkers don't have any grip, and it's going to get icy here way before it gets icy here. This handicapped ramp is covered, and this is on the sunny side of the building. I realize that sun is not part of the ADA law, but in actuality, this will be a real hardship in the wintertime for mobility impaired drivers who are trying to traverse that walk. So those are just a few thoughts. I'd really like to urge you to wait for the Disability Commission to have a chance to reflect and make a recommendation to you before you take any vote on this issue.
Can
I just add something?
Yeah, sure.
So just to say, out of curiosity, I looked at the Fowler Library and the distance from the handicap parking space where someone would open the door to go out to the front door of the library using the method of a width of the eraser against what is shown here on map, and they are basically the same distance. So, I mean,
the interior distance traversing to the circulation device.
Sure, but their issue is getting inside and what someone might do.
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
I'm talking about beyond that, to the spirit of getting to what you're trying to do in the library.
Okay, any more comments from the public? Just want to make sure before we have a second comment from someone that we have everybody that is going to speak. Okay, one last remark.
Your caution to Mr. Nardi to list the conditions that he was talking about. The condition, if you are going to in fact waive this Med Perry 362 Bedford Street, if you're going to not pay attention to 7.7.2.12, and you just waive parking, I would ask that you put as a condition prior to issuing the building permit that you get the memorandum of understanding between the Emerson Umbrella and the library in writing. We were told at town meeting that it was in the works back in April. Now we're being told it's in the works. I would ask that be put in as a condition. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay. Oh, we have another comment from the public.
Well, just a very quick one. Guy Clymer, 13 River Street. I'm a trustee of the corporation and been very involved with the creation of this plan. We've been working on it for 5 years. A couple of years ago, we met with the Commission of Disabilities and walked through this plan with them, particularly focused on the garden in the back, the children's garden. And the commission was just over the moon about this project because of the attention we were giving the people who have disabilities, and particularly the children who have disabilities. So I just wanted to say that we have been in touch with them and are planning to go back to them in terms of fine-tuning the back garden plan with the pathways and so forth. So anyway, we've been in touch and we've had good results with them.
Thanks. Okay.
One last comment, please.
It's after 10.
I'm just going to say that at the September 5th Disability Commission meeting, they were expecting someone from the library to be there, and they weren't. So that their dialogue with the library is not on the current plans. They all still assumed that there was a parking lot on Main Street. So part of their over-the-moonness was from an older plan.
Okay. I guess now I just want to see where we're at with this.
Could I just respond
Sure.
to a couple of those things very quickly? We were not invited to September 5th, so I wasn't aware of that. I have met with Chair of the Disabilities Committee, who made a number of comments about the preference of the parking on the Main Street side as it's detailed. They particularly are interested in van parking now that has rear egress, not just side egress. And the Main Street alternative allows for that. The Sudbury Road side, let's be clear, does not allow for it. In addition, they had a preference of having handicap accessible parking on both sides of the library. Di referenced our early conversations with them, and it was clear to us that if you're in a wheelchair or a walker and you need to park at the Umbrella parking lot, cross that street and go up the ramp, it's a lot of work. And it was acknowledged that this alternative was they actually preferred the parking on site that was designed initially. But this was preferential, and we're glad to have more conversation with them. The MOU is a condition of the umbrella project, and that was taken as far as the assistant or acting town manager felt she could take it. We've had a number of meetings on it, and she just said, this is it. Have to pass it off now to the new town manager. And that's where that resides right now. Regarding the sanitation and trash, it's detailed. There's currently trash that's located behind a fence. That's not intended to change. And lastly, Elizabeth was out, but Ed Nardi raised some really good questions. Most of them were related to conditions that came up at the HDC, and we committed to confirming that we will abide by those issues. But I think it's appropriate for him to summarize and submit that regardless.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what we should be doing next. So we ultimately need to determine whether we're going to make a recommendation to the ZBA. You know, based upon the criteria that we've reviewed in the site plan review process. I mean, we've had a number of points raised, you know, that could lead to substantive changes, and that's what I'm still wondering about. I mean, but then, you know, I don't know where the board stands on how, whether you want to, you know, pursue those or enforce those. So, you know, regarding parking relief, regarding sustainability design, regarding location and access of accessible parking.
Speaking of parking, and not to scoff at our bylaws, I would be inclined to support the request for relief from parking, but would want to tie it to the completion of that MOU on the shared parking. I think we've looked a lot at parking in the center, and we've heard people speaking, raising their concerns both ways. And as the gentleman was speaking about the library parking, I was thinking, so where do you, if you were to require 64 spaces, where do we put it? And is it a new parking lot in our historic town center, or where is it? I've gone to this library a lot. I always am able to park immediately adjacent to it on the street there. I'm inclined, not that my anecdotal experience dictates, but we've seen a lot of traffic studies at the town center. I think that I'd be inclined to support it in a thoughtful manner. The request for relief from parking. With regards to the sustainability issues, we raise them consistently. I'm wondering whether it is within our purview on a site plan review to require specific sustainability elements, such as...
It is one of the criteria of our site plan review. What the conditions are, that's another matter.
Yeah. And to that point, I would just say that I think it's really terrific that they're going with a heat pump system, and that their big capital investment is in something that's going in the right direction. I think, Kristen, you raised the points about the air sealing and the like. It would be great to include that as part of this project, but I think the fact that they're not investing, six figures in a new gas-powered boiler at this point in time is a really good step in the right direction. So my thoughts.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I felt the same way about parking. Like, what's the alternative? So what are the options for sustainability and conditions?
So this is a new, a new site plan criteria.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say this is probably the first time the board is, having to, test that criteria. I think it comes down to weighing, this is a town basically a town public project. And, you know, I would be hesitant to make a recommendation for any type of sustainability requirement that may cause a conflict with another board or committee, such as requiring use of solar on all of the roofs. I mean, it's that won't get approved by the HDC. But your comment as far as evaluating additional air sealing and insulation methods for the inside, from the inside of the Hayward Benjamin house. That's.
I mean, you can still do it on the outside. They replaced all the clapboard, but I mean, like, I guess I'm just saying, what input can we have in terms of? I mean, we can't really say. Can we see what your operating costs are going to be? Can we see before, after? We can't require a HERS report. Where would be an evaluation?
You can make that recommendation if the board feels inclined to make a recommendation that the applicant attain a certain HERS rating.
Well, it's almost less that. It's you can model what operating costs will be before and after certain energy improvements, and as a town project, I think that's important to at least have that information so you make your
Since the
investment
town is
decisions.
committed to these goals, it's just, I mean, I'm sorry that we're having to make a condition. It should not even be a question.
Well, maybe
it
they
should be
started it,
leadership from the library.
Yeah, it just is good.
That they should be coming in with a world-leading approach. I don't really get it. It's just that's the most disappointing thing to me in the proposal.
I understand the argument that if you fix it in the house, it's going to leak out of the old library. But to me, if we're already gutting the house for other purposes, now would be the time to do that. And if we later renovate the
main library,
building,
great, you're all set.
Then we're all set, as opposed to having to.
But
go
I mean,
back.
it's just like we shouldn't be the ones throwing these ideas on the
Yeah.
table. It should be the library coming saying, "Hey, this is all the great stuff we're doing on sustainability."
I don't think that's fair, Tim. Let us respond, please.
Well, given the town's Article 51, what we've agreed to as a town, yes, it's fair.
I just wanted to clarify though, because we're not, I think what Jeff said was that a previous occupant had largely gutted. They didn't entirely, they went on sort of a long-term renovation project from the inside out of the house. We're not proposing to entirely gut the house. We're doing some selective removal of some walls. There's not a whole lot of historic interiors left, but for instance, the front hall with the stair has some historic finishes. We're not, in instances like that, in several of the rooms, we're keeping the walls and we're being very selective about going in and to Mr. Nardi's point, we're replacing the wiring, but we're not planning to replace all the finishes inside. So that's why it's.
You
don't have to.
And
you don't have to.
This is important to be clear because I wasn't allowed to state or didn't have the opportunity to state it. The house has been gutted. In 20 years ago, they did some pretty interesting stuff. On the outside of the studs, they added thermal bridging. It's foil-faced bubble wrap insulation. Not perfect, but it provides thermal bridging. Over that is outside sheathing. Over that is overlapping tar paper, which acts as an air seal. For all intents, and then if inside, most of the new walls are 2x6 have shredded blue jean insulation. So truthfully, if we evaluated this 20-year-old Britain Auto home versus most other homes in Concord, it's far along. I disagree with you about the windows because they are not. They're single pane with poor balances.
I said from a cost-effective standpoint.
Okay.
Right.
However, the house is actually Perry did offer to put an air barrier on the outside. It's already been done. So
I guess all I'm saying is I'm not seeing any data to show that. You can get an energy audit that can show you exactly where your air leaks are. What I heard was we're going to do this work and the air is going to leak out. And I think it's important to have factual data that you're dealing with that says this is how much. You might not even need as large of a system, a heating system, as you as you spec if you don't know, you know, what conditioned space you're trying to heat and based on the like. So it seems like you have this opportunity to say, look at Concord taking this, you know, historic building, and you wouldn't even know it because we're, you know, in the 21st century now. I apologize, I don't remember where. You know, it's a really cool model to be like, yeah, we might be historic looking, but look how modern we actually are. So there's a lot of opportunities there, but it does make me concerned that we are not making, does not sound like you're making decisions based on data in terms of energy audit.
Yeah, I mean, our office is doing the MEP design as well, so, you know, I might be the civil engineer, but we have done energy models. They do need to be updated, but we are looking at the envelope, you know, with the addition, with the existing house. We are creating, you know, we've created these energy models, including operating costs, and discussed that with the, you know, the library commission, and this is how we've come to this MEP design. So
What were the blower door test results?
I can't answer that.
Can you tell me if it was done? If that test was performed?
I can't tell you if
okay,
that was
so
done
that's all. Like,
or
I
not
just
either,
think that kind of
Right,
data
and
would be
it's a
important.
matter of like, we're asking the questions and we're, you know, and you're
Well, we don't
now
wanna argue.
responding.
It's late,
but you're-
it's late. But what should we do for
It's
tonight?
25 after 10. It's really not up, as you know, Matt stated, it's not really, you know, up to the planning board to design this project for the applicant. You're making a recommendation to the Board of Appeals. So at this time, the planning board believes that as a town project, the applicant should conduct an energy audit of the Haywood Benjamin house. He followed me from downstairs. And be required to incorporate additional energy efficiency
measures.
Then
I would say cost-effective energy efficiency measures as recommended.
As practical.
Yes,
as-
yeah, I mean, I think
you know,
that's
as
important, but I
possible.
think.
But it just, and then when it comes to providing parking relief, I think that there's been a pretty serious evolution in kind of the zoning community. You know, it used to be like, okay, we need to provide for cars as much as possible so that everyone can drive their car to wherever it is and there will always be a parking spot. Now I think it's more following Yogi Berra's advice or comment that, you know, don't go there anymore. It's you know, no one goes there anymore. It's too crowded, right? And it's the idea of like, yeah, popularity is the reflection of, hey, there is traffic and movement, and people now need to find alternative sources of transportation. They need to do more walkable, patterns of community, move in tighter, smart growth, crosstown connect. We're going to look at alternatives. We're not going to provide for the cars as much in the future. And in fact, you will see us proposing as a board in the future to change the way that we evaluate parking and to go from our 1950s suburban parking requirements to something that's more contemporary. At least that's my belief. And so I don't really see a need to provide 68 more spots here specifically for this project. So then where does that leave us?
I think we're making a recommendation with additional conditions.
Okay. So, and those conditions are, first of all, that one about the pursuing a more efficient, for getting more data and potentially improving the design from an efficiency standpoint. You had
there was the MOU with the umbrella. I'm
Right.
not sure, given that that's dependent upon multiple it's dependent on the town manager, dependent upon the umbrella to come to the table. How does that get made as a condition, and where in the process does?
well, it already is a condition for the umbrella and the library umbrella, and the acting town manager, met and got to a point. And so it just needs, the new town manager just needs to be, brought up to speed, and, have that final conversation about the MOU.
So the condition right now is on the umbrella. Can we put the same condition on the library?
Yes.
That's what I would want to do.
Yeah, that's fine.
And that's it, I think.
With respect to parking from my.
Right, but I mean, those two conditions, I think, are the main conditions.
Well, one is
There was,
is part of your.
Well, and then
part
we
of
have
your
the standard
recommend-
conditions, of course.
Well, the issue with the energy efficiency is, that's not a condition, that's a recommendation that the Board of Appeals have the applicant conduct an energy audit and come up with these additional measures.
Right.
So, you know, that's a conversation that the Board of Appeals will have to have, is, you know, as far as timing, or the board can take that conversation you had about that and to turn it into a condition, it requires, so prior to the issuance of a building permit,
Right.
you know, the
it would
applicant does that, who is gonna be the responsible, you know,
No, this
party
is prior to
reviewing that?
granting the special permit is what we're looking for, which is,
So that's different, that's not a condition, that's a recommendation that the Board of Appeals get additional information on that issue before granting the
getting
special permit.
Okay. So that's just part of the way that we will phrase the
The
recommendation.
recommendation.
Okay.
Accessibility, you don't wanna look at that any further?
Any comments on that from the board?
I guess, Elizabeth, the Accessibility Commission, what are they a reviewer on this, on the special permit? So who in town staff or otherwise is responsible for providing input?
So the project has been designed to meet ADA requirements. And as part of, there is a condition that, you know, they will need to get a road right-of-way permit from engineering, to, you know, they will be making some modifications to the layout of the 2 handicap parking spaces on Main Street to meet certain standards, but there is no requirement for a design standard for the on-street handicap parking. There's no town requirement. There are design standards out there in the industry, and that's what the applicant will work with the engineering division on. But as far as the accessibility of the project, it has been designed to meet the ADA requirements, which is under the purview of the building commissioner.
Okay, and I guess it's up to us as a board to determine whether we think that in general the arrangement of parking and loading spaces in relation to the proposed uses is adequate.
Right.
Which would include presumably discussion of the appropriateness of the location of the handicap parking spaces.
Right, and I was persuaded by the applicant's view that the back area is very constrained, you know, to be able to provide for those spaces. That secondly, there was this idea of putting the parking lot off of Sudbury Road, but that, who knows what kind of issues that might have. It's not been investigated, and I think that there is adequate provision made on Main Street. You know, it may not be ideal, but given the other constraints of the project, I'm satisfied that it's adequate provision. And so for me, I'm okay. Maybe it could be further improved, but I don't know.
I think I did hear a couple of very common sense comments on that. The book drop on that side.
I think that was very common sense. Yeah.
And I mean, I've got to assume that snow and ice is, you know, the library is responsible for snow and ice, but I think having a book drop near the, I think ideally that becomes one of your primary entrances coming in that side, if that's especially the handicapped accessible entrance, and there should be a drop right there.
I guess I would look to the library director.
Would you have 2 or would you move 1? So, I mean, it sounds
That would
like
make
something
sense.
that they're gonna want to do for the patrons. They're gonna.
So I'm also hesitant to have the board have a conversation about changing something when the assistant fire chief has weighed in. I mean, I understand
You're talking about
people's
the handicapped
anecdotal
access?
information? No, about
Putting a
what side,
book drop?
no, what side the fire department will respond if there's an emergency to this property.
Right. Yeah, I'm fine with the plan as presented, I think. So, any other issues before we make a recommendation?
Well, maybe we could consider adding that as part of our condition, that there would be a book drop on the Main Street side of the building to make it more accessible from a handicap parking perspective. I think that reasonably falls within that part of our charge.
Okay. All right, then. So, I don't know if I can get anyone to phrase out our whole recommendation there, or if we have something we can...
I would move that we make a recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals in support of the application of the Concord Free Public Library for a special permit and site plan review under sections 434, 77212, 11.6, and 11.8 of the zoning bylaw, and for interior renovations, new accessible pedestrian entrance and site improvements, subject to the additional conditions that we've discussed tonight, specifically with regards to a memorandum of understanding of the umbrella, the addition to the plan of a book drop and the near the new handicapped accessible entrance, and that
we also recommend
we recommended the Zoning Board of Appeals require a energy audit of the existing Haywood Benjamin House
and evaluation of energy efficiency improvements.
And yes.
Okay.
And the rest of.
And all the standard conditions.
And the usual.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do I get a second on that?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Okay. All right, thank you. Let's see.
It's like at 5:30 in the morning.
So yeah, they go home. At least mine's 11 o'clock.
Head down.
Yeah. All right. So please clear if you're not staying. We've got a couple of very quick things. Can we put off the minutes, or we can put off the minutes?
In the morning, coming back tomorrow night.
What do you have? 3 sets?
No, you just have one set.
Yeah, I'll
One
just,
set.
August 6th.
Yeah, if you only have one set,
I feel like I'm making
that's fine.
Okay. I think we can skip committee liaisons reports. Or do you? No, you've got a CPC.
I will just say it's CPC season right now.
Yeah.
So we've now seen a large number of the applications, or we've received a summary of applications from the applicants, in particular from town. And I'm just trying to think of things that are, there's a number of things to touch on. I know it's very late, but just in terms of the list of
projects
that are being proposed, how about I save them for our next meeting?
It'll still be within the season. It won't be past the season for our next meeting.
We are nowhere near we're at the point of requiring any kind of planning board input.
Okay.
Good.
That will come in October, November.
Okay. Is there some way you can share with us a summary or something, point us to the right place, maybe?
Well, we haven't actually received, so all of the applications will be on the CPC site. We've not received, I think the deadline for applications is like the 26th of September, at which point they'll all show up.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
You're doing such a good job. I recommend that we reappoint you
I
to
gotta
the
tell you.
Community Preservation Committee
Yeah,
as our
thank you.
representative
I second that.
for a term to end 5/31/21.
It's a lot of work, but it is very interesting.
All in favor?
Yeah.
I think that was pretty
Snuck
easy.
that in.
All right. Then I just wanted to mention that I did meet with Mike Lawson, the chair of our select board, regarding our housing choice initiative. And we discussed 2 topics. One was he would like to enhance the affordability aspects of our proposals by possibly offering tax reductions or abatements of housing transfer fees in the case that, for example, an accessory dwelling unit is rented to a affordable tenant, or in the case of a two-family that it is actually deed restricted as affordable. And he's not talking about the SHI units, 80% units, but rather sort of moderate affordable. So he was going to go back and look at those kinds of proposals. I look at them as enhancing what we could potentially offer through this housing choice initiative. So more to come, but it was interesting. The second thing that we discussed was public outreach and the possibility of having a public forum. And we talked about the public forum as maybe being the beginning of November. So we'll try to look for dates, work with Kari, work with Elizabeth, and try to come up with a date that is not conflicting with other town events. We'd probably do it as a joint affair with the select board. But the one proviso is we do need to get through to the two-family, at least the two-family bylaw proposal, so that we have language that people can look at and that we can discuss. And of course, as predicted, the tidal wave of projects has come and has made it harder for us to make progress on those zoning initiatives.
I do have one other, so everybody received the email that we were successful in getting MAPC grant for the Thoreau.
Congratulations, real money too.
Would like to know if there would be one planning board member who would like to be the liaison for, that project.
I have nomination. I'd like to
volunteer, Kate.
I was going to suggest Alan, because for that project, first of all, I think form-based code is most likely, I hope, to be specified. And then secondly, it is, a project with some significant architectural scope. So if there's a way that we could twist your arm into looking at that, I think that would be a good choice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, there's no.
Okay.
I don't think you have to formally appoint Alan. That's from Jeff.
Oh. Should the energy audit be a condition of the building permit and not ZBA approval?
Well, sorry to interrupt again, but
I'm going to raise a point of order.
Yeah, it's good. We've already closed this. Yeah.
You closed that?
Right.
Should be discussed.
That's true.
We'll be looking for clarification on that because it wasn't
That's
specific.
fine, next meeting.
Yeah. Okay. We'll consider that public comment. All
Although
right.
this is a public meeting, it's not a public hearing that gets closed. But this is a
But the topic, we have
The topic
already
can be brought up
concluded
at
the
Board of
topic though.
Appeals meeting,
Yeah.
and they
Okay.
can decide how they want to do
So,
that condition.
then, any other liaison reports or staff updates? Okay. And now we will open up for public comment. Any to be had? Okay, I think it's time to adjourn. Thank you.
I